It made one giant circle. We were talking about something. The subject slips my mind today. We had Tori Amos playing in the background of our conversations. It was just like any other weekend that we would drive. When we stopped at a light at an intersection, something in my gut wasn't right. It kind of felt like it dropped. I looked around and didn't notice anyone staring at us, so I just shook it off. Thinking that it was getting to be about 1 a.m. and I was just tired. We decided to drive one more loop and then call it a night. About halfway through our driving, my friend noticed in her rearview mirror a small white truck. She said to me, "I don't want to freak you out or anything, but this truck has been following us for the past 20 minutes. I look out my passenger side door mirror, and there it was. I told her that it was just probably someone doing the same thing we were, and we continued to chat. After about 5 minutes, he switched lanes and was coming up my side. I tried so hard not to look over because that feeling in my gut came back. When I looked, he was flicking his tongue at me, yelling, "Woo, woo, let me get a taste." I turned back to my friend as I was rolling up my window. I was creeped the hell out. I mean, yeah, I have been catcalled by some guys, but nothing like that. Also, this man was like 50 plus. He started to slow way down when he seen me roll my window up. My friend was saying that she was just going to keep driving if he didn't stop following us. We didn't want him to know where either of us lived. I know now the smart thing to do would have been to pull into the police station. However, we were young, stupid, and scared. He kept following, so my friend decided to get on the highway, thinking he wouldn't follow. But he did. He stayed in the lane next to us, on the left side. He followed us all the way to another town. It was a decent-sized tourist town. We started to run low on gas, so she pulled into this gas station. And me being a quick thinker, and thankfully there was a guy at the gas pump next to us who looked like he could kick some serious ass. So I walked up to him and said, loud enough for Creepy to hear, "Hey Bubba, Mom has been trying to call your cell phone all night." I gave him the best pleading eyes that I could and glanced over to the driver in the truck that was now parked behind my friend's car. It worked because the man replied back, "Sorry sis, I was out with a girl, but decided to go to the lake. I'll follow you guys home." With that, the creepy guy paid for his gas and left. I thanked the stranger who helped us, and my friend even paid for his gas. We left thinking we were safe. We even took some back roads to make sure he couldn't find us again. Once we got on the highway, headed back home. We felt like we could breathe again because he was nowhere in sight. She drove me straight home and stayed the night because she was too scared to go home alone. I didn't blame her. 2 weeks went by, and we were still going out on the weekends, just driving around. One morning before I left for work, there was a dozen roses on my doorstep. I assumed they were for my sister because her boyfriend was always doing sweet stuff like that, until I remembered that she was on vacation with her boyfriend. I looked at the note that was attached to the outside. It said, "Pretty girl." I flipped it open and it said, "All I wanted was a taste." I immediately called the cops and they sent a couple of officers out, and I gave them the flowers and the note. They threw the flowers away, but put the note in an evidence baggie. Caught them up on the whole creepy situation. They looked around my neighborhood and found the truck about 2 blocks away with no one in it. They took down his license number and ran his tags. Then a week after, I got a call that they arrested him and wanted to know if I wanted to press charges. I sure did. So even though I know you're mad, I pressed charges, creepy man. Please let's not meet again. 2. This happened last summer while studying abroad in Argentina for a semester. I was with 6 other girls from my host university. We had left our respective apartments in Buenos Aires and taken a bus to Mendoza, in the west, known for beautiful scenery and great wine. Our second day at the hostel, we decided we'd do a hike in the Andean foothills closest to where we were staying, to a place called Cerro Arco. We opted not to do a guided tour since it was expensive and we were pretty low on pesos. Plus, who needs a guide if you can do it yourself, right? Wrong. We took a bus as far as we could from the city to the outskirts of town and figured we'd just ask locals where we needed to go. Having been told it wasn't far from the last stop of that bus's route. In retrospect, we should have already been clued into the weirdness of this situation, because the locals we asked on the bus, including the bus driver, claimed they didn't know how to get to Cerro Arco. And I know now that this is a popular hiking spot. Some people should have known at least the general direction. Regardless, after setting out from the end of the route bus stop, which was really just an unmarked spot on a hill, we wandered until we found a woman who pointed us where to go, remarking as we thanked her, "Be careful. Don't walk down that road after dark. It's not safe for a bunch of young girls." We had about 5 or so hours until dark. This was during the winter and it got dark early, so no one was particularly worried, and we walked down the dusty and deserted road towards the trail. We walked a kilometer or so and didn't seem anywhere near a hiking trail, just continuously walking down some sort of rural highway with low mountains looming far in the distance. This was not the beautiful Andean hiking experience we'd been promised, so we stopped at a rundown gas station to ask if this was genuinely the right way to go. This is when shit got weird fast. The gas station didn't seem to have any gas pumps, so I remain unconvinced. Was run by an older man. We asked for directions, and upon leaving, he asked if we wanted to ride part of the way there from his son, who was going down there anyway. It turned out we still had a good deal of highway to walk down, but we declined, having decided we were going to do this on our own, and willing to do a shorter hike to make it back before dark. The sun had appeared shortly upon our arrival into the store, and leered at us from behind the counter the whole time we spoke to his dad. We had walked about 10 minutes when we hear a car behind us. The son clearly hadn't taken our polite no for an answer, and was coming to convince us that we should ride with him. The hour or so that he followed us was profoundly nerve-wracking, and made me swear I'd never travel with only girls again while abroad. Physically, I'm exotic looking to many Argentines. I'm very tall. I towered over most Argentine dudes with long red hair. This man seemed to latch onto that right away. "My, what hair you have," he said, like some twisted version of Little Red Riding Hood. "I'd love to touch it." He was hanging out of his piece of shit truck, with the 6 of us on the very edge of the highway, hugging the safety rail. trying to keep our distance. He kept calling me Mi Flaca, a cutesy nickname as if we weren't total strangers, and wouldn't take his eyes off of me. My Spanish is good, but I froze in the weirdness of this situation and just stared at the ground without speaking. I can take you up to where the trail starts, he kept saying. I'm a good guy. I'll let you ride for free. My friends, who must have no sense of self-preservation, at first shrugged and seemed willing to take him up on his offer, even though we had agreed not to just minutes before. Fuck no, I'm not going, I said. We talked amongst ourselves until they finally agreed that this was probably not safe, and told him, firmly, that we weren't interested. He whispered some things to himself and to us to freak us out. I couldn't hear what he was saying. He then shrugged and drove off a side road. I was a little shaken up because of the intensity of the way he stared at me, and how he literally licked his lips when talking about my hair, but figured it would be fine. We kept walking, keeping the mountains on the horizon in our sights. Not even 5 minutes later, I heard the same clanking truck sound from behind us. My heart sank. He pulled up, even closer to us this time, and seemed angry now. I'm a good man. I'm a family man. I'm not going to rape you. Laughing harshly, who the fuck says that if not a rapist? He looked over at me again and sighed loudly. You'll make me want to come out of this truck, standing there with that hair. He then leaned out and offered us some kind of herb to chew that supposedly helped with altitude sickness, which none of us accepted. He was now visibly angry and would drive a while in front of us to seem like he was finally leaving, and then abruptly stomp on the brakes and laugh as we jumped in shock. There was still nobody on the road, and we had no idea how far away this stupid trail really was. One more time he drove off, several of us now on the verge of tears. One more time he came back, the clanking engine sound announcing his return. This time he literally parked the truck, lunged out, and pursued us on foot. We took off, scrambling in the middle of this god-forsaken rural highway, hearing his angry, maniacal laugh behind us. He gave up at some point, but we kept booking it until finally the road forked and a dusty campsite came into view. There were lots of hikers, a small hostel, and several dogs, so we knew we were safe. We sat and regained our composure. I was literally shaking, and some of the other girls were crying. Some of the hikers spoke to us, and a few reiterated that we shouldn't have been walking by ourselves, though it was clearly a popular hiking location. We did an abridged hike, waited for a giant group of South Africans to leave, heading towards the same hostel, and found a bus that left from a spot much closer to the trail than the one that had dropped us off. In retrospect, one man would have struggled to kidnap, hurt 6 girls, but his fixation with my hair and general crazy demeanor made me deeply regret that hike. Argentina was a wonderful experience, and I never once felt unsafe in the city of Buenos Aires. But to the rural man who wouldn't take no for an answer and wanted to touch my hair, let's not meet again, you weird fuck. 3. I work for a national non-profit and work remotely from my home in Michigan, but I am sometimes asked to travel. In early July, I had to fly to DC for a series of meetings. with about 10 other staff members. They were all out-of-towners and would all be staying at the same hotel. While I was on the plane, I realized I forgot my cigarettes at home, and by the time I landed in Washington, hopped in a taxi to the hotel, and threw my bags in my room, I was jonesing super hard. It was already late by then, almost 11 at night, and despite my better judgment, I looked on my phone for the nearest Walgreens so I could pick up a couple of packs for the week. I decided it was too late to call one of my work friends who knew I was already in the hotel to walk with me. And while I consider myself a fairly cautious person and wouldn't normally go exploring an unknown neighborhood alone in the middle of the night, my nicotine craving won out. I headed out for the nearest drugstore, or at least the nearest my phone picked up on, which was about 10 blocks away. While the hotel was situated on a busy, well-traveled street with lots of bars and restaurants, I quickly realized the turn I had to take to the store put most of my trip on a much more secluded, darker stretch. I also realized just how long 10 blocks actually was. Lots of boarded-up shops and homeless people lined the neighborhood. I always make a point of carrying some extra cash when I'm in the city to give to folks who need it, and blew through that pretty quickly. I could feel the occasional eyes on me as I passed by, and one dude yelled something from across the street. Just some standard, innocuous, "How's it going?" shit. All that said, the trip there was uneventful. After getting out of the store, I immediately paused out front to light up, when a guy who was standing along the side of the store building, the store was right up against an alley, called me over. He was standing maybe 7 feet away, leaning just inside the entrance to the alley. I ignored the first couple of "heys" and started to turn to head back to my hotel in the opposite direction. But then, he let out a really aggressive, "Bitch, I'm talking to you," which made me jump and instinctively whip my head around. Mistake number 1. Just looking in his direction was an invitation for further interaction. His voice calmed, he asked for a cigarette, and, still taken aback, I shuffled over to him in this alley, where I really couldn't get a good look at him at first. I handed him a cigarette and my lighter, and he asked what a little girl like me was doing out all alone. I stammered something and he asked if I wanted to go party. I told him no, that I needed to be getting back. I remember not wanting to tell him where back was, because I didn't want to reveal that I was from out of town and completely unfamiliar with the area. After a minute or two of this, he grabbed my arm around my elbow and kept insisting how fun it would be. I tried to slide my arm out of his grip, not super aggressively, but just to signify that I was not about this. But he tightened his hold. What he was doing wasn't overtly aggressive either. It was just like he was trying really hard to convince me. But then he put his other hand on the small of my back and just held it there, and told me he lived just a couple blocks down and that he could show me a real good time. We could smoke, put on some music, whatever. Without removing either hand, he started to lead me out of the alley entrance and down the street in the opposite direction I had just come from. By now, I was totally flipping shit internally. And even though I was trying my best not to let it show, my voice was quivering a bit when I asked him, to please take his hands off of me. and that I needed to get home. Without removing either hand, he just laughed and kept me moving. His laugh was disgusting. I was scanning the street for someone to try to flag down for help, but didn't see anyone ahead. He just kept muttering, now more to himself than to me. What a good time we would have, and how I was such a cute little girl. After about half a block, when his hand slid a bit lower, I finally snapped out of my daze and started to struggle. I now yelled at him to let me go and tried to push him off of me. He resisted me and tried to pull me into the shadows of the storefront we were standing in front of, out of the way of the streetlights, and kept telling me, now angrily but not yelling, to be a good girl. In the midst of this, he had me held tight and he pulled my body against his. This felt like an eternity, but it couldn't have been more than a couple of seconds, before I was somehow able to push him, elbow him, knee him, whatever I could do, and break free. As soon as I was out of his grasp, I started to bolt back in the opposite direction and heard him yelling out all sorts of colorful names behind me. I didn't look back for what felt like forever, and when I finally did, I was relieved to see that he wasn't following me. That didn't stop me from running another few blocks until I was completely out of breath and near hysterical. I called one of my co-workers and could barely get the story out between my sobs, and he was insistent on me going into the nearest open store, it was a McDonald's, and waiting for him to meet me there. I sat away from the windows but kept my eyes locked on the door, as best as I could from where I was sitting, terrified that the creep had somehow seen me walk in. The person I called and another male co-worker were there in less than 10 minutes. I work with some seriously awesome people, and they walked me all the way back to my hotel room door. I was still completely rattled, and so they called yet another co-worker to get in on my drama, and she came and spent the night in my room with me. All three of them urged me to call the police, but I just didn't want to deal with it. I just wanted to put it behind me and get on with the rest of the week. Honestly though, a month later it's still not entirely behind me. I know it was a very close call, and I can't help but keep thinking about the next close call that could always be right around the corner. Fuck that guy for making me feel so entirely unsafe and insecure. 4. In college, about 2.5 years ago, I met this guy. I wanted to make a friend and he seemed harmless, despite my feeling that something was off. At that time, I ignored my gut in favor of gaining a local friend. He seemed to have a crush on me from the time that he met me, and while I was flattered, I wasn't interested. I told him as much, and he didn't argue. At first. The next time I met him, he had some arguments for why we were compatible. I stuck to my guns. He seemed accepting and didn't bring it up again. We talked and walked around school. In the course of our conversations, he learned a lot about my interests and hobbies, and checked them all out, then reported back to me about where he'd visited or when he thought he had an idea to spend time together. I didn't realize it at the moment, but he was really good at talking about nothing at all, and I came away knowing literally nothing about him besides his name. One day, I was about to get kicked out of the building because they were closing, and I didn't have a ride home. You probably guessed what is about to happen. He took me home. I was smart about it, telling my father when we left and who I was with. Things started to get creepy after that. He started showing up where I was by coincidence. He would stand outside my class and stare at me. I tried talking to the professor about it, but all he said was that I was smart in changing my seat in class, and that I should go to campus security if he made me feel threatened. I asked him to give me some space, and he quit, obviously showing up everywhere. One day I came home from school to my brother telling me about a trespasser on our property. We live in the middle of nowhere, and around our neighborhood, you'll see lots of posts or mailboxes painted lavender. It's a code to everyone that we don't like strangers trespassing on our property. My dad made a big deal about it, and either side of our driveway is graced by a lavender post. The trespasser must have parked in a neighbor's yard, then navigated the forest behind our house because when my brother confronted him, he ran into the forest. He hadn't parked anywhere nearby. My brother described this man to me, and he fit the description of my school stalker. I guess my brother ran out with our little cricket and waved it around at the guy. A cricket may injure a small animal, but at the range bro described, he probably wouldn't even have bruised from it. It's still scary to see someone with a weapon. My brother was alone at the time. I decided to end my silence toward him. It seemed better to know where he was than for him to show up unexpectedly. I didn't want to ruin his college opportunity because of an overreaction on my part. And I didn't know the security would believe me anyway, as I was seen with him a lot before. I ended up dropping a class that semester and failed another. The next semester went better, and I rarely see him now. I've since moved in with my fiancée, about half an hour from my old home. I dropped out of college so that I can find out what I want to do with my life before I spend money on time and school again. To one college creep, I'd say let's never meet again, but until I move from the area, I don't think that's feasible. 5. This happened over a year ago, but it still doesn't sit right with me. For a little background, I am a female who used to work at a very popular home retail store. At the time of the incident, I was 21. Many of you who have worked retail know you can get some pretty crazy characters no matter where you work. I was just going through my shift as normal, helping any customer that asked, when a sweet old lady came up saying she needed my help. She was small and frail, had her hair covered with a scarf, arm in a bandage, and a black eye. I don't know her name, so I will call her Ellen. She said she had recently fallen and wanted to make her home safer for herself, so it didn't happen again. As I was talking to her, a very large, very tall man in his 30s came up and started talking to us. He said he was her grandson and had come to town to help her while she recovered. Now at first this guy only set off any red flags by staring a little too much as I was talking to his grandmother. Eventually it got to the point where I had been helping this lady for almost an hour. Her fall was caused by a stroke, so it was hard for her to always say what she wanted. All of a sudden, the grandson, we'll call him Jim, just rests his elbow on my shoulder like I'm some kind of post. That's how tall this guy was. I'm 5'4", and he can rest his elbow on my shoulder. I lean back and say, "Please don't." He gives me an odd look and starts laughing. He says, "Does that make you nervous?" Me, being more annoyed than anything, gave him a scowl and tried to wrap up this way too long task of helping Ellen out. He sees now I'm trying to get away, so he starts saying how he needs the bathroom redone too, and he will need help with that. That's when he starts asking me personal questions. "Do you have a boyfriend? How old are you? Do you live close?" I give him one-word answers. Then he reaches out and ruffles my hair, like you see in movies with little kids when they've done something right. I look at him dead in the eye and say, "Sir, do not touch me." Eventually they leave, and I go tell my manager why it took so long for me to clock out. But that's not the end of it. The next week he comes back in with Ellen, but asks for my help in storage, which isn't my department, but we are required to help. For some reason I decided when I saw him to move the ring I wore to make it look like I was engaged. Maybe if he saw it he would back off. I was wrong. Now, a couple days before, I had gotten a big fat lip that was pretty bruised from being elbowed in the face at a pool party. It basically looked like I got punched. He saw this and asked if he wanted me to kiss it and make it better. I ignore him, which makes him angry, and he starts going off on how he'd hurt the person who did this to me. He starts getting louder and louder. That's when he reaches out and lightly touches my lips. I grab his hand and yell, "Don't touch me." My manager walks by and recognizes it as the guy I had told him about and calls me away. My manager politely told him that he needs to get what he came here to buy and head out because I had projects to work on. My manager, who is a pretty intimidating guy, said that Jim gave him the creeps. Luckily that weekend I was off, plus 2 extra days. I guess while I was gone, Jim came in without Ellen and asked where I was a couple times a day. Then asked when I would be back, what kind of car I drove, and what my last name was, all of which no one would give him. So, Jim, who doesn't know how to stop touching me, let's not meet again. 6. When I was a junior in high school, I got my license. Getting my license meant that I would be the first person home for a good few hours. After the initial excitement of having the house to myself wore off, I got into a routine. I would come home, greet our border collie, Moss, make a snack, watch some TV, and then eventually head up to my room. To truly appreciate this story, it's important to know the layout of my parents' house, which is where all this happened. My parents' house is an old Cape Cod-style home. By their estimate, it was built sometime in the late 18th century. The way it's set up, you go in through a back door, and right at that door is a set of stairs. Up those stairs are 2 bedrooms, one to your left and one to your right. My bedroom at the time was the one to the right. There is another set of stairs all the way on the other side of the house at the actual front door that leads to another couple of bedrooms. My parents' master bedroom is on the main floor. My family only ever used the back door to get into the house. We never used the front door or the actual back door, which led to a deck. I guess that on the day this happened, the majority of those doors were unlocked, since they live in small-town Maine. Anyway, on this particular day I came home and went through my routine of greeting the dog and making a snack. I watched TV for probably about half an hour to an hour, and then decided to go upstairs and do whatever teenaged me wanted to do. At this point, I had been home for probably a good hour or so. Like usual, I climbed the stairs with Moss trailing behind me. The stairs creaked while I did it, as they do. Nothing seemed out of place or unusual. However, when I opened my door, everything in my room had been destroyed. My bed, my 4-post frame and all, which was normally against the wall facing the stairs, was in the middle of the room. All of my clothes were out of the dressers, which were each feet from the wall where they were supposed to be. My underwear drawers were completely out of my dresser. Some of my underwear was laid out on my bed. The only things neatly placed in a room that had been scattered. My clothes were everywhere. My furniture was everywhere. Not a single other thing in the house had been touched, and nothing in it was missing. It was only my room. Obviously, I immediately booked it. I took the dog, got in the car, called my mom, and sat on the side street until someone was there. The police came. There was nothing they could do. There was nothing they could find that would link someone to it. So for the next few months, I wasn't allowed to go anywhere by myself or do anything alone. However, one thing has always bothered me. I know I unlocked that back door that day, like I always did. Since it was our main entrance to the house, it was always locked. So whoever went in my room came in through another door, went through the entire downstairs to my staircase, found my room, and went through my things. They knew where they were going. So, whoever went through my room when I was 16, let's never meet. 7. When this happened, I was 19 in London. My then boyfriend had called me a cab to go home from his place, which is about a 30-minute drive. His car was in the shop at the time. Before I got in the cab, he kissed me and told me to text him when I got home, in earshot of the driver. I get in and the man starts a friendly conversation about what I'm studying. Nothing unusual. But the conversation starts to get a bit personal when he tells me he's from Pakistan and a Muslim. He then asks if I am too. I am Iranian, and my family is Muslim, but I don't practice. But I just said yes to not cause any awkwardness. He started to tell me I look like a good Muslim girl, and that he wanted to marry someone like me. I became increasingly uncomfortable, and noticed he deliberately turned onto a street that would make the ride 15 minutes longer than the usual route. I text my boyfriend saying the driver is creepy, and he replies telling me to keep on texting him until I get home, so he knows I'm okay. The cab driver asks if that guy that said goodbye to me was my boyfriend, and I immediately said yes, hoping that would shut him up. He asks if we're serious, and I said yes. And he continues saying he wants someone exactly like me. He then locks the car doors. I ask him why he did that, and he says for safety. I swear my mouth was so dry I could hardly swallow. I was pretty scared, but I didn't say anything because he was still going towards my house, and I didn't want to make him angry. He asked me the most disgusting questions. If I was still a virgin, if I'd ever done stuff with a man. I refused to answer and kept frantically texting my boyfriend. but the douche had either left his phone somewhere or fallen asleep. So much for being worried about my safety. When we finally get there, he overcharged me, told me he had my number, and that he was going to call me so we could meet. I said I won't because I'm in a relationship and my family wouldn't like it. He said I can keep it a secret. I tried to open the door to get out, but it was still locked, and he laughed. He then stared at me intensely through the rear-view mirror for what felt like a full minute. My stomach felt hollow, and the street was quiet and dark, which made it even more creepy. He finally unlocked the door, and I booked it to my front door and frantically knocked as I looked for my key. My mom asked why I looked so pale, and I told her. She proceeded to call the cab company to make a complaint, and they admitted he'd done this before and promised they would fire him, and we reported it to the police. But they didn't pursue it, since he hadn't harmed me. Mr. Cab Driver, I hope we never meet again. And no, I won't marry you. 8. Last year I was temporary host at a restaurant, which was not very popular, so we were not often busy. One midday shift I hadn't seen a customer in a while, when this old, short, stocky man came in and asked for a table near a window. I sat him in the section of my friend Mariah. Each waiter/waitress has their own 3 to 4 table section of the restaurant, and I went in rotation between sections to keep the number of customers being seated fair. Mariah was college age, and this man was easily around 65 or older. My host stand was close enough to their table to hear the conversation that got weirder by the minute. He kept mentioning that he worked for a towing service. He looked far past retirement age, and kept complimenting her. It was seemingly innocent things like, "You have a pretty smile," or "You're a great waitress." To which she, kind of nervous, laughed and would say something to the effect of, "Aw, thank you," thinking he was a lonely old man just trying to be nice. But then his compliments got weirder, like, "With a body like that, you must have a boyfriend," or, "I wish my ex-wife looked like you when we met." He actually said both of those things to her. At one point, she felt him try to grab her ass as she was walking away from him. She got so uncomfortable that she ended up having our male friend Chad finish waiting on the man, giving the excuse that her shift was over, when really she went in the kitchen and literally hid from him until he left. When Chad came to be his waiter, the guy lost any cheerfulness in his face and looked genuinely angry. And I was actually afraid at this point, thinking he might try to prey on me next. I was around the same age as Mariah, and the only one in the same area of the restaurant as this guy. He didn't. He just quickly finished eating while hardly speaking or looking at Chad, and left without saying a word. The guy left a tip of $5 in ones, and wrote Mariah on each one, front and back, from a pen in his pocket. I assumed trying to make sure Chad didn't think it was for him. Our manager gave Mariah permission to avoid this guy anytime he came in because of how he behaved. A few days later, he came in and asked for Mariah. Her shift didn't start for over an hour, so I told him I would have to seat him with someone else, and he refused. He insisted on waiting at a table that was meant to be in her section, and literally sat down prepared to wait over an hour. I went and got our manager, and he told the man he couldn't let him wait that long for her in that section, but he could sit him with another waiter. The dude left without saying anything. The main phone line for the restaurant was at the host stand, so we could take reservations, etc. And this guy called me the next day, asking to talk to Mariah. I could tell by his voice it was him, so I played stupid and said, "Can I ask who's calling?" And he just said, "No, put her on." I got my manager. He picked up the phone saying, "Hi, sir, this is Bob. Manager, how can I help you?" Pause. "She's not here. Can I take a message?" I watched his face when he listened to what this guy said, and he looked like he was about to throw up. He hung up on the man without saying a word. He wouldn't tell me what the guy said. It was clearly something disgusting aimed toward Mariah. We ended up having to tell this guy she didn't work there anymore, so he would quit asking for her. After he was told that, he never came back. I have no idea what his problem was, but I hope he never goes back there for Mariah's sake. 9. My freshman year of high school wasn't very easy for me. After recently coming out about being sexually abused as a child, I was struggling with some internal issues attached to that, and I was being bullied pretty bad. This led to a suicide attempt on 11/04/2010, where I took 2 handfuls of pills. Long story short, I was in the hospital for a week, and then put back into school. I hoped the problems with other kids, I was always very quiet, would go away, but I was wrong, of course. I kept to myself due to the constant bullying, and just always kept it moving. I had biology with this one girl, Sarah. Fuck you, Sarah. Who would sit way in the back of the class and just say all these horrible things about me to her friends. I know, it seems cliché, but Sarah was a typical bitch. After a while, my biology teacher took notice of this. He was always quirky, sweet, and a really good teacher. So one day he holds Sarah after class and says I don't know what to her, but I heard my name mixed into their conversation as I'm leaving the door. From then on out, she kind of left me alone. Dirty looks ensued still, but the shit-talking went down to a minimum. My bio teacher held me after class one day and was just asking how I was feeling. All of my teachers were notified of me being in the hospital when I attempted to kill myself. So it wasn't uncommon for some of them to pull me aside or ask how I was doing. I was always quiet, polite, and did my work. I was a model student, not to brag. So we're just talking about life in general. But there was just an odd feeling I got from him. Something wasn't right, but I just brushed it off because he was my teacher. He would cause no harm, right? Fast forward to after graduation 2014. I'm working at a local coffee place, and he comes in one night. I'm happy to see one of my well-liked teachers, so we start talking. He asked how old I was again, and I told him I just turned 18. He says, "What a shame. You could have come to the bar with us if you were older." He had this really creepy smile on his face that actually gave me goosebumps. I kinda just awkwardly laughed it off and wished him a good night on his way out. Why does this story belong here? Not long after, a news article is shared by one of my friends that he was arrested for sending money out to the Philippines to buy kiddie porn for someone, and was busted during a federal child pornography operation. I always wonder, what if I let him get too close to me? Would he have tried something? But now I know why he creeped me out so much. So, Mr. Saar, let's not meet again, even though you're probably in prison. Update. I also found out he actually flew to the Philippines on more than one occasion to meet with the kids, and yeah, you get what I'm saying. So it wasn't just internet porn. 10. This happened during the summer of 2004. I live with my husband and children in a small town about 50 miles outside a major city. My town is relatively quiet, without much crime, but we do get the occasional break-in and other petty crime. I should also note that my area seems to get many door-to-door salesmen and church groups, but I generally considered it more annoying than anything menacing. It was around 10 a.m. and I was home alone, cleaning the house and listening to music. Metallica. I had my front window open that faces my front door, as we don't have central air, and it was pretty hot that day. Someone knocks on my door and I look through the window to see a girl in, I would guess, her early 20s standing there. She has a clipboard, a pen in her hand. I assume that she's selling something. I turn off my music and open the door, ready to tell her I'm not interested. She immediately hands me a laminated card with a list of magazines she's selling. I'm holding this card, not really reading it, and was about to hand it back to her when I flip the card over and see written in red pen, "This girl is crazy. Do not let her into your house." I'm shitting bricks when I read this, and I'm about to slam the door when she says, "I love Metallica. Turn it back on." She pushed her way past me and sat down on my couch in my living room, which is about 5 feet away from my front door. I'm still standing in the doorway of my living room in utter shock. I just stare at her for 5 to 10 seconds before I find my voice. I tell her she needs to leave now. She lit up a cigarette and walks over to my stereo to turn the music back on. By this point, I'm completely freaking out and walk to my kitchen to grab my phone to call the police. She ran out before I could even dial. I live 2 blocks away from the police station, and they're there in less than 5 minutes. Long story short, they aren't able to find her, but tell me that they've gotten complaints about someone that fits her description from other people in the area as well. A neighbor down the block told me she came to her door too. She didn't try to go in her house, but she was super pushy and kept saying odd things, like "let's go shopping sometime" and other nonsense. So, creepy magazine sales girl, Metallica fan, let's not meet again. 11. So this happened a few years ago. I thought nothing of it at the time, but looking back, it's actually kinda creepy. A while ago, I was a dumb little preteen who was still really naive and trusting. I was always on this site where you could post stories and talk to people, as was my friend Brianna. We were fairly close, but polar opposites in some cases. While I talked to maybe 1 or 2 people on that site, She had over 50 conversations at once. Not only did she talk to shit tons of people, but she was very, very trusting. Even more than I was. She'd give people a picture of her. She'd date them after knowing them for a few weeks, and other stupid crap. Again, we were fairly young. Around 12 years old, kind of young. So that was all really stupid. Anyway, she starts telling me about this guy she met. He's in his mid-20s and he's a hot emo guy. She shows me a few pictures, none of which have his face showing. I remember one of them. He was sitting on a car with sunglasses on, with a hat that said bitch on the thing that sticks out. I voice my concerns and she ignores them. Fast forward a few weeks or months, I don't remember, and she is asking me for my Skype so she can talk to him. She already had his number and was texting him, but I guess she wanted to hear his voice, who knows. Dude supposedly lived in New Jersey, so she probably thought that she'd get a bigger bill so she didn't call him herself. I don't know. Either way, I say yes. She calls him and they talked. She didn't have anything to Skype on, so she had to wait until I came over to talk to him. And she always turned on the camera. I was usually sitting next to her. Sometimes he even talked to me. He seemed nice enough. But I didn't know him for long enough to grow too attached. Brianna grew really fucking close to him. I heard talk that if her parents got too annoying, she'd run away. She'd go live with the guy. I know. I told her that was stupid. She didn't listen. Thankfully, she soon got her phone and tablet taken away for who knows what. Once that happened, the dude stopped talking to me. He sent the occasional message to me, but it was clear he was looking for Brianna. Bro never crossed my mind until about a week ago. Thinking back, there were a few warning signs that this guy was a creep. He wouldn't talk to anybody but Brianna, and trust me, she tried to introduce him to a few people. She was really damn close to him, so I assume, when I wasn't around, he was grooming her or whatever it's called. The thing that really freaked me out was the nagging feeling that the picture he sent with the hat looked familiar. So I look it up, and lo and behold, there he is, in all his glory. If you're curious, look up Scene Guys on Google Images. You'll find him. Obviously creeped out, I tell Brianna and I's mutual friend all about this. Apparently, they were told by Brianna that the guy was a model or something, and that's why you'd find his pictures around. Who knows what would have happened if her stuff hadn't been taken away. He'd seen our faces, knew our names. My Skype has my name on it. Only people I talked to there were friends I trusted. And God knows what else she told him. So emo guy that knows who I am, please let's never meet. 12. When I was 17, I decided to head out into town for some munchies, because my diet is unhealthy and I love food. So anyways, I left my house after informing my mother and started walking down my poorly lit street until I had to turn right to make it towards town. Anyways, my previous street was very long, meaning you had to walk a good 4 to 5 minutes to reach the end of it and turn into town. So I was about 40% down the street, and this beat-down red car, stereotypical I know, started following me. At first I thought he was just passing, so I turned into the grass and continued walking my normal speed. Then I noticed it slowed down and was walking with me. The windows were tinted so I couldn't see the person inside, and the person didn't roll their window down, so I just thought it was a grandma. I've had a history of panic attacks since previous experience, so I was just trying to think of rational explanations 24/7. Anyways, I was almost down my street with the car still following me, until, literally out of nowhere, like 1.5 seconds, the front door opens and a man, Caucasian, 6 foot, black hair, wearing a long-ass yellow nightcoat with glasses. He looked like a scary nerd. Steps out and literally bolts at me. It took me a second or two to understand what was currently happening, as it was so sudden. But when I wrapped my head around it, I ran as fast as my legs would go. I've turned around a corner by this point, and there was only another block or two before I got into town. So I took off my purse, turned around, and threw it as fast as I could at the man, who was inches behind me. It obviously caught him by surprise, as he stopped for a moment before continuing to run at me. I was at the end of another street. As soon as I turn this corner, I'm into town and I'm safe. Remember in the film I Know What You Did Last Summer, during Helen's chase scene? She turned around before the fisherman was right in front of her, and we were all like, she almost made it. Well, that was the case right here. As soon as I reach the street sign at the end of the street, I feel the man grab my shoulder and throw me down hard on the concrete. I mostly hit my back and not my head, thankfully. I groaned loudly. I guess he thought that I was unconscious as he started to drag me to the side into the grass, which is where I guess he thought he could hide me as he dragged me. I was currently wondering where the hell everyone was, as I was sure there would be somebody leaving town at this point. As he was dragging me, I decided it's worth a shot, and I yanked my hand out of his when he least expected it, and hit his junk as hard as I could with hand. He screamed before falling down. Now, I was more furious than scared, so I took off my spiky-heeled shoes and started hitting him in the face with it. While I was in the middle of beating him, he suddenly kicked me in the chest. The wind was knocked out of me, and I fell down, grabbing my chest in pain. The scream of that man must have been loud enough, because some people were starting to walk out of town onto the street. This was like a minute later, and the man was gone. Seriously, I beat his ass. How the fuck did he get away? I was looking away for like 45 seconds. Anyways, the people were nice enough to walk me back to my house. I filed a report that I was searched. Nothing came of it. No car, no man, no witness. Seems like I was crazy. Anyways, my mom got my munchies since then at nighttime. 13. I attended a Catholic school for my primary school years. My teachers were super proud of me for reading above my year level and wanted to show off the gifted kid. Because I was 9 and had a massive ego even for a little girl, I soaked up all the praise that was fed to me. We were having an upcoming mass for some milestone that the school was having. Hell, I hardly remember it. And my teacher bestowed upon me the honor of working the overhead projector for the entire event. I was so goddamn proud of myself. This was a church in the mid-90s, so it was one of those old overheads with the clear sheets of plastic with words on them. They were trusting me, a student, to control one of the massive light-up things that showed the outline of the entire event. I'd never heard of a kid doing that before. So there I was, diligently following along with the Mass and switching the pages when the time came. I was up in the narthex, and for some stupid reason, there was no adult sitting with me. Well, until about halfway into the event. Some man I had never met before walked up to where I was sitting and sat down way too close to me. I really didn't know what to do, so I shifted over a little so that our thighs weren't touching. Unfortunately, I couldn't get very far because he was sitting on the skirt of my uniform. I was torn between paying attention to the Mass and wondering who the fuck was this grown-up. I could feel his eyes on me, and I was starting to feel very nervous. It was stupid, but my nervousness was half because this man was creeping me out, and half because I was terrified of messing up my very important job as overhead projector person. Then, after a while of him just looking at me, he leant down and whispered, "You're very pretty." I didn't reply, but I did look up at him for a moment. All I really remember are the two bright blue eyes looking at me like I was food. I do remember that it was the middle of a hymn, and people were singing "Christ be our light." No one could hear us over it. He leant down further and whispered, "I want to stick my cock down your throat." Looking back, I feel sick at the memory. Who the hell says that to a 9-year-old girl? Back then, however, I had no idea what that meant. All I knew was that it sounded violent and scary. I still didn't reply. He didn't seem to care. "But not yet," he continued. "I'd have to cut off your head first." The previous comment went over my head, but that made me terrified. I knew what that meant, and I knew this guy was talking about hurting me. I couldn't move. I was trapped, alone with this guy still sitting on the hem of my skirt. My overhead projector job was long forgotten. However, I heard creaky footsteps and realized that someone must finally be coming up to check on me. In the time this was all happening, the overhead was still stuck on the second verse of "Christ be our light." I guess that would have been pretty hard not to notice. Quick as he came up, the guy fled. Piss-bolted, really, the coward. He ran down the other set of stairs and unfortunately didn't fall down them. I had never been so happy to see a teacher. At this point I was crying. I think the teacher was going to tell me off for messing up the projector job, but stopped when he saw how upset I was. I told him about this scary man, but I was too frightened to give many details. I think I was too young to really process what was happening to me and what that man said. Later in the afternoon, I calmed down enough to say that he wanted to cut off my head. The police and my parents were called. I think I was shielded from what happened after. My parents, besides telling me to always call for help if I felt threatened, tried to make me forget through new toys and treats. The school's teachers had a student safety meeting and supervised students better from then on. And kids were discouraged from talking about it too much. What I could gather much later, since this caused a bit of gossip buzz in my little town, was that someone confirmed my story by seeing a strange man leaving through the back door of the church. Apparently someone else reported that a man who matched the description had had lunch in a fish and chips place near the petrol station in our town, As far as we all knew, he didn't live where we were, and he was only passing through. Since no one was hurt physically, and no one in any neighboring towns reported any missing or assaulted children, the story faded away as the years went by. Still, I vividly remember the creep that terrorized 9-year-old me. I harbor a lot of resentment towards him, and people that look at kids that way. Sick bastards. So creepy, scruffy guy that wanted to do horrible things to me. Let's not meet. Not for my benefit, but for yours. If we ever meet again, it won't be me that loses a head. 14. This happened last year around this time. School had just started, and my only child was in kindergarten. She had only been in school a few days. We live in a rural area and we only have one car. So in the mornings we, my daughter, her dad and I, get up and take her dad to work. Then my daughter and I come home and get her ready for school. Because we live on a rural dead-end dirt road, we have to drive about half a mile down to the main road where her bus picks her up. Everything was fine that morning. I got her on the bus and headed home. I had the day off from work. I only work part-time, so days off in the middle of the week was normal for me. Anyway, I was doing some house cleaning and putting away some laundry. I went into my daughter's room and started hanging up some clothes in her closet. I had the TV on in the living room, watching it from her room. Then I hear what sounds like a soft, muffled cough. I freeze. I have no idea what the fuck that was. I have no idea what to do. I'm just standing there, almost paralyzed. My mind is racing. Maybe the cat is outside her window, hacking up a hairball. Was I going crazy? Maybe it was the TV. It must have been the TV, right? Yeah, it's probably nothing. At this point, I'm still standing in her room holding a shirt and a hanger, not moving a muscle. I really have no idea what to do. I then think I should head next door and have my father-in-law check it out. I say out loud, fuck it. I drop the shirt and hanger and take off running to the house next door. Luckily, my in-laws live in the house right next door, only about a football field away. And my father-in-law is on disability, so he is almost always home. He is in his mid-60s and on an oxygen tank most of the time, so I don't really know what I thought he could do to help protect me. But I was just really freaked out and didn't want to be alone. Plus, he was a hunter. Hunters have guns. So I am running faster than I have ever ran before across our yards. And I bust into his back door, screaming his name. He comes walking out of the kitchen looking annoyed that I just scared the crap out of him. I am on the verge of tears, trying to tell him something is going on at my house, but I am talking so fast he can't figure out what I'm saying. So he tried to calm me down, and I tell him I think someone might be in the house. He asks if I'm sure, and I say yes. I am begging him to come over and just check it out. He agrees. He grabs his gun, and we get in his truck and drive over to my house. I wait in the truck with the doors locked while he goes inside. I am freaking out, looking all around me. He is in there for what seems like forever. He finally comes out and asks if I left a pack of Newports in her room, right near her bed on the floor. Now, I am a smoker, but I smoke Camels. I have never bought Newports in my life. I tell him no, those aren't mine. His eyes get huge and he gets a really panicky look on his face. He tells me to stay in the truck and call the cops. He hands me his phone and I call 911. The lady says we have to wait for the state troopers because we don't live in town. They seriously take like an hour to get out to us. I have already called my husband at work. He called his brother to come and pick him up. He doesn't work far from home, so it only takes about 20 minutes for them to show up. My father-in-law, my husband, and his brother are now walking all around in the woods that surround the houses. Nothing. There isn't anyone besides us. After a while, the state trooper shows up and takes a look around. He finds nothing. He takes a pack of cigarettes, I guess, as evidence, and takes my statement along with my father-in-law's statement. He tells us there really isn't anything he can do. I can't tell him what the guy or girl looks like because I didn't see anyone. There is nothing. Just a sound I heard and some smokes on the floor. Nothing is missing from the house. There isn't anyone there now, and it doesn't look like forced entry. Fuck me hard. Of course there isn't going to be forced entry. We are in the middle of fucking nowhere. Why the hell would I lock my door when I leave to go somewhere? I feel like such an idiot, but nobody locks their doors around here. I don't even have a key for the door on my keyring. We just keep it on top of the outside fridge, as a just in case. After the trooper leaves, my father-in-law gave my husband the gun to hold, in case someone comes back. My husband and brother-in-law change all the locks on all the doors that day. And now we keep a key on our key rings and keep the doors locked at all times. We didn't take our daughter out of school that day. She was only 5, and we thought it would just stress her out. We did let the school know to be on lookout for some weird activity, and we had a talk with our daughter about stranger danger and what to do if she sees someone in the house she doesn't know. I did have her sleep in our bed for a few weeks, but she seemed like she wanted to go back to her room because she's not a baby anymore. Well, that's it. Life moved on, and nothing has happened since. We never heard from the trooper or anything like that. We never had another incident like that again either. I have no idea what they were planning on doing. I don't know if they were after me or my daughter or if they just wanted to rob us. I don't think I'll ever know. I still get paranoid from time to time, and I hate to be alone in the house. My husband got me a dog to keep me company and help protect us. I hope with time the fear will get less and less. Please always lock your doors, no matter how safe you think your neighborhood is. You never know who might be just passing through. 15. It happened when I was in 5th grade. My parents are awesome, and were very present in my life. But once I got a bit older, my mom got a job, after being a stay-at-home, because we really needed the money, as my brother neared college. I say all of this to give some background as to why I was home alone this particular afternoon. It was the early 2000s and I had just rode the bus home. I walked into my house by way of the old house key that we used to hang in a shed my dad built. This may seem dramatic, but something just felt off. I was always the type of kid to jump at any noise or shadow, so I assumed my fear was irrational. and tried harder to be macho. As I stood in the kitchen, making my after-school omelette, I was convinced I was already a 5-star chef, thus this strange snack. I simply could not shake the feeling of being watched. Finally, I heard something sounding to me like footsteps coming from the floor above. Close to tears, I caved, grabbed the landline phone and called my mom. She proceeded to calm me down and reminded me that after she picked up my brother, she'd be home. It was not unusual for me to have these little irrational episodes. I hung up and decided to go to my room and cower in my embarrassing fear until she returned. Now, in my home, there are 2 staircases due to my dad building onto our home when I was about 6 years old. He's an engineer, so he has a cool way of doing things. The second staircase is actually quite close to the home's original one. The one I ascended was the original one, as it is closer to my room. As I grew more and more instinctively petrified, I finally reached the top of the stairs. My room was a few steps away. Before I could take another step, I heard a noise, almost like a rustling. I called out, "Hello?" praying I got no response. Then what soon followed scared me to death. Suddenly, following my scared shout, the sound of someone running down the second staircase and out the door proved my fear to be finally rational. I'd never heard anyone bolt down a staircase so quickly. I think what scared me the most was that I never saw, only heard. I had actually been hearing someone in the upstairs level of my home. I spent at least half an hour in there, with whoever that was. It was that quick, nothing else happened. But I had never been so scared in my life. I stood, plastered against the wall, too afraid to move, until my mom finally got home. I still will never know what that was. And let's just say we don't even have a spare key anymore. 16. This goes back to my very first year in college. I was 19. At the time, I had an on-again, off-again girlfriend with whom I had just had a fight. Meanwhile, my best friend at the time, a guy called Matt, had been chatting up this girl named Sarah. The thing about Matt was, he was the kind of guy who always had a girlfriend or another lady or two in the works if things didn't work out. The problem was it takes a certain level of instability to be okay with this setup, and that attracts a certain level of instability. Anyway, he was chatting up Sarah, but at the last minute, decided to get back together with his ex. In order to save face, he played it off as him testing her to see if she'd be right for me. He at no point consulted me about this. Instead, he approached me at lunch and said, "Hey, you want to go on a date with Sarah?" I responded in the negative, but was informed that this was less a question and more an informative statement. We meet up, and the date goes okay. She's fairly pretty and very nice. We had ice cream and sat around talking. At the end, we exchange numbers and go on our separate ways. Now, I should clarify that this college was a very small, private Christian college. Relationships tended to move quickly, and I was fairly inexperienced. That's why I let things go on as long as they did. She texted me that night, and we talked for a bit before bed. The next morning, she told me she loved me. I was a bit uncomfortable with this, to say the least. The next day, she made a comment about, if we got married, I should have left. I should have gotten in my car and driven as far the fuck out of there as possible. I didn't. We met that Saturday and went to church together. She held my hand the entire time, and any time I so much as glanced in her direction, she got this big, creepy, serial killer grin on her face. There was something about that look and the feeling I got when I saw it. That was when I realized it was time for me to nope on out. I decided that regardless of how mental she was, I was going to break up with her properly. I took her to a quiet area of the campus, where a lounge area had been set up, and I made it clear that I was a little concerned about the breakneck pace of this relationship, and that I thought it would be best if we distanced ourselves from one another. She asked if I was breaking up with her. After a little bit of stalling, I said yes. Thus began my 2 months of hell. The next morning, I woke up to a knock on my dorm room door. It was 6 a.m. I opened my door to see her and a couple of friends. She informed me that they were there to help talk us through the relationship issues we were having. I slammed the door in their faces and went back to bed. Not my finest hour. But she was nuts and I was tired. When I woke up, the friends were gone. But she'd been sitting outside my door the whole time, not crying, just sitting. She was angry. I walked out into the hallway and she gave me a lecture about how this was not how you were to treat a girlfriend. I walked away from her while she was still talking. I was done with this. The next few days I saw her out of the corner of my eye a few times. Each time I had a friend confirm that she was actually there. I don't just mean around campus either. That was explainable enough. Other places as well. For example, a friend invited me to the college class at his church. About 5 minutes later, in she strolled. I don't remember the exact wording the teacher used, but he clearly indicated she'd never attended this class before. That night I got a text that read, "I saw you made eye contact with me at least twice. I think you want to get back together with me." I spent most of the next few weeks in my room, only leaving for class. My friends would drop food at my door for meals. She began following them as well. Matt actually told me that Sarah found him playing basketball with some other folks and asked where I was. He told her he and I were meeting for dinner. She said she'd join us and sat down on a bench. He reminded her that it was only 2 and that dinner wasn't for another 4 hours. "I know," she replied. My grades plummeted. I stopped going to class for anything short of a test. She knew my schedule. I tried to perhaps dissuade her by getting back together with my aforementioned on-again, off-again girlfriend. That worked for a time. But Sarah wound up talking to her. They had a chat, and Sarah made some thinly veiled threats that made her uncomfortable. So she broke up with me once more. When the semester ended, I was done. My family lived about 700 miles away. I figured this was more than enough distance to keep her at bay. I blocked her on all forms of social media and changed my number. Adam, another friend of mine, later recounted Sarah's actions to me. Apparently, for a time, she dated a guy who had the same first name as me. Broadly speaking, he even looked a bit like me. She told him to wear glasses because it made him look distinguished. The fact that they were the same style as mine, I'm sure, purely coincidental. During this time, her emotional state was erratic, to say the least. She told people I'd touched her without her permission, and that I'd broken up with her in a shitty way. Adam also thinks she turned to self-harm, as she wore long sleeves in summer in the deep south. Eventually, she met a guy who was a bit clingy and desperate, and was willing to accept her quirks. That's the last I heard about her. It's kind of tainted my view of relationships. I used to be sort of clingy and creepy, but this sent me perhaps a bit too far in the other direction. I'm a bit too detached for a lot of girls now. I also developed a sort of fear of intimacy that I'm slowly getting over. I'm not exaggerating when I say that last year was the first time I hugged a person since the incident in 2010. The main point here is I don't care how cute she is or how totally perfect we'd be together. No, I won't go on a date with your friend. Edit. I just realized I neglected to mention a key piece of creepiness. She did contact me once since I changed my number. I have no idea how she got my new number, and mentioned that she would be willing to come up and see me if I ever wanted to talk. This was shortly before she started dating totally not me. 17. So this happened to me when I was 19, working my second job. I worked for Chipotle, and one of my closing duties as cashier was cleaning the dining area as well as the restrooms. I had been on the job for half a year, and I honestly preferred the closing shift because it was far more relaxed than in morning rush. It was in the last 40 minutes before closing, and we had a small cluster of customers come in. One man in particular, I would say, was a frequent customer. He would come in every other weekend. I'm terrible at names, but he seemed to have remembered my name after just meeting me once. Now, I always have my happy to help smile on, but he always had a habit of making my smile drop. It was not that he would say anything bad in particular, he just had a creepy way about him. On this particular night, he dined in. While everyone else in the small cluster of people came and went, he sat at a circular table, facing my register, watching me. Every time I would look up, I would catch him staring. He didn't even bother pretending that he wasn't. He would just lock eyes with me until I would step in back just to get away from his peering eyes. It was really fucking creepy. Thankfully, we had 10 more minutes, and it looked like no one else was coming, so we started closing duties early. My manager wanted me to clean the bathroom since he didn't want me to rush my creepy onlooker. I was glad too, and went to grab the mop bucket and solution to scrub the restroom. Now, the restrooms were right around the corner, a few feet from the register. The bad thing was that our fountain drink blocked our view of it, so we never could tell who was coming or going to the bathroom. I mention this because what happened next is what took my night to creepy to fucking disgusting. As I went and cleaned the female restroom pretty quickly, I thought I heard the door open, but I didn't hear the clunk of the door closing, so I thought I was hearing things. The men's restroom always required a lot more attention, so I didn't think much of it as I rushed in there quickly. What I saw fucking made me blink in disbelief. There, standing by the urinal, facing the entrance to the door, with his dick out, stroking it pretty hard, was the guy from the dining area, with a fucking disgusting, lurid look on his face. He tried taking a step forward. I was horrified, and all that came out loudly was, "Why?" Really loudly, which must have freaked him out because he tucked it into his pants pretty quickly. I should have blocked him, but as he rushed me, I stepped back and ran toward my register area, swearing and trembling. When the guys cleaning grill noticed, they came out asking what was wrong. I started bawling, then got my manager and he wrote down the incident in his note. After that, I got sent home. I would love to say they caught the son of a bitch, but they didn't. He got away with flashing me and has made me extremely paranoid about public restrooms. I'm the type of person who dwells on shit, and I still can't stop myself from wondering if he had hid, could he have very well assaulted me? I hate to think about it. So, flashing jerkbag, let's not meet ever again. 18. This story goes back to a few years ago when I was about 16, 17. And to set the scenery of where all of this happened, I lived on a busy main road that was filled with restaurants, bars and houses. I stayed in a complex. Opposite me was the so-said busy street, and to my right was a gas station and a mini shop for those quick items, and to my left was a KFC as well as a mini shopping block that consisted of maybe 3 or 4 different shops. However, as busy as it was in the day, at midnight you could hear a pin drop, besides the odd occasion of a car speeding by. Now that we have the scenery set, let me get to the story. My dad had passed away and my mom and I were struggling financially. It was going really bad. She was breaking down and I was the strong one. Financial issues didn't really bother me. What bothered me was seeing my mom so depressed about it all. And in her mind, she wasn't being a good mom. I obviously begged to differ, as she has always been my rock. I would do anything for my mom, and back then was no different. Now, I was quite popular. I knew a lot of people, and a lot of people knew me. I spent most of my days in clubs with my friends, as young as I was. Oh, how I wish I could go back and change all that. Because of this, my number would always just land up in everyone's hands, and 9 out of 10 times I would just ignore and never reply. But one day I got a message from a name I didn't recall, and there was something about the message that drew me, and so I replied. It was a teenager, just like myself, but he kept himself well dressed by the look of the photos he sent, and he looked a bit dorky to say the least. I could tell he was an introvert. We had been sending a few messages between us for a few days, and it led up to the fact that he was willing to pay me different large amounts of money for different things I would do with him. I asked him how he was getting this kind of money, and he replied that he had inherited it with his parents' death. I believed him. Now, even the most simple tasks of kissing and hand jobs consisted of receiving thousands. I needed the money, and so naturally, I put it under consideration. A few more days go by, and I agree to it. I was so desperate to buy some food for our house that I just completely ignored all the dangers of it. I agree to meet up late that night. I tell him to meet me in front of KFC, where he would then pick me up, as it was pretty much a 2-minute walk from my house. The time comes for him to meet me, and he says to meet him behind the KFC, as he doesn't want to seem dodgy, and pick someone up in the middle of the night. Now, this is where I should have noped right out of there, but I say okay. I start walking towards KFC, and I'm now standing in front of it. I haven't yet turned the corner to go to the back, and I just get this gut feeling to turn around. Luckily I did. I turn around, run and run home, and I check my phone and see that he says that he is waiting for me. So far, he's given me no reason to doubt him. So I think to myself, it's obviously my nerves that kicked in. Instead of walking, this time I climb onto my scooter and decide that I will drive there and pretend to be a casual person just driving by, just to make sure that everything looks okay. As I do this, I tell him that I am coming, but keep in mind, he's expecting for me to be walking, not driving. He texts me back okay. He's parked behind KFC waiting for me. As I'm driving and turn the corner, I see a group of 5 guys standing and waiting. It was dark, but by the light of street lamps I could tell they were easily in their late 30s, 40s. 2 of which were standing with their backs against the KFC wall, right by the corner, almost waiting. The other 3 were not too far from them, all standing quietly in the darkness. I have never felt my soul leave my body quite like that night before. To this day I get flashbacks and visions of all that could have happened to me. I wish now I had gone to the police, but in that moment of time, I was just so scared. I truly do believe my life would have been taken that night if I had turned the corner while walking. Edit. I actually forgot to mention this part. I'm lesbian, and at the time, I already figured that out for myself, so it was a huge step out of my comfort zone. 19. This happened back in 2014. I went out on a night out for Halloween during my first year of university. I was wearing high-heeled boots and a leather jacket. Over the course of the night, drunk me had taken them off and left them at our group's table, due to being uncomfortable. By the end of the night, I'd practically danced my way to near sobriety, and I went to my group's table. However, they had given up the table, and my boots and jacket were nowhere to be seen. Someone had stolen them. Whatever, they weren't expensive, and I rarely wore them anyway. Now, however, I had to walk the 15 minutes back to my accommodation. I didn't have money for a taxi, so I thought I'd just walk slowly. I asked one guy, the asshole in the group that everyone hated, if he could just keep me company because he was tall. He laughed, said no, and walked off, dragging the only girl who was also shoeless with him. So I was walking alone, shoeless, in a busy city center, watching out for broken glass or anything else that was harmful or disgusting. Everyone else was so far ahead that I couldn't even see them, but I just kept going. I was halfway to my place when I was stopped by a Middle Eastern man. The city was very culturally diverse. He asked if I was okay, and I was grateful someone cared enough to make sure I was all right. He offered to help me walk home, so I accepted for at least part of the way. He was very kind, and he told me his name was Omar. He started saying how beautiful he thought I was, and how lucky he was to have found me, which unsettled me slightly. Once I was around the corner from my place, I thanked Omar and said I'd walk the rest of the way on my own. He instantly looked offended. "Don't you want to invite me in for a cup of tea to thank me?" I told him no, because I don't know him. He kept hold of my wrist. "Well, can I have a kiss for helping you?" Again I declined, and his grip tightened. "Well, do I get a hug for being your friend?" By this point I just wanted him to let go, so I gingerly gave him a hug. He then grabbed me and tried to kiss me, but I pressed my lips together and instead he just licked up my face. I finally get free and start walking away. He follows me. I speed up, and so does he. I abandon my check for glass on the floor and begin sprinting. Now terrified as I hear him running too, I get out my phone and call my friend, Rob, who I beg to help me. Omar is no longer following me, but I needed someone to keep me safe. He agrees and gets to my flat not long after I do, with a knife, in case Omar was still there. I told the people in my group and they were mortified they left me alone. I returned home for a week because I was thoroughly shook up. Now on a night out, I make sure everyone is close by, so it doesn't happen again to me or to anyone else. So, Omar, let's not meet. 20. I was a 17-year-old, 6'3" male who was lanky but practiced boxing at the time and worked out, so I had some muscle on me. Anyway, it happened about 7 or 8 months. I was working at a southern fast food restaurant called Zaxby's. I had been working there for about 2 months, and I had already been screamed at, stolen from, and just generally verbally abused. Being from the south, a bunch of my friends and all the managers I was working under said this was completely normal, and people will keep doing this as long as I was working there or any other fast food restaurant. There's about 10 Zaxby's in my town, and the one I was working at was near a mall, and also near a soup kitchen, so a lot of homeless people would hang out there, but they wouldn't really bother you unless they needed some money. Just the usual, really. Another thing is that I couldn't drive, so I'd have to wait for my mother to come get me from my job, which could take about an hour depending on where she was getting me from. It was probably about middle of December, and it was extremely cold, at least for a southerner. It was probably about 25 degrees. After I got off my 8 to 5 shift, I was sitting outside with no jacket on, because I had forgotten mine, so the name tag I had to wear was fully exposed. I was sitting on my phone, and a man around 40, probably 6'5", 250 pounds, walked up with a big tray of food and sat down at the small table I was sitting at. I was a little paranoid because he was so big, but this was not an uncommon thing. Men and women of all ages would sit near the employees if they were lonely or bored. At first, he seemed normal except one thing. He was wearing a muscle shirt and small gym shorts. He started the conversation with quite a high-pitched voice. He said, "Hey, buddy. My name's Tim. I can see your name is Chase." He gave an extremely wide smile and started laughing. I said, "Oh yeah, got to wear this bad boy every day or I'll get fired." He laughed again and stared at me, smiling. He started talking about how he'd only been living here a few days or a week, and he didn't know the roads at all. He pointed at a large van he had and said something like, "I've driven her my whole life." It was actually a very nice van, and had decals and stuff on it, making it not like the stereotypical rapist van. I noticed it had a local license plate, which is important in the end. Anyway, so Tim kept talking to me and started talking about his job and how he was working at a local mental rehabilitation facility. It's not like an insanity house, it's more for kids with depression that have attempted suicide. Anyway, he told me he had only been working there for a few days, but he hated all his co-workers. Suddenly he turned around and looked at a passing black woman and said, "Hey Barbara, what's up?" She looked at him very strangely and kind of jogged off. And he said, "Man, I must have freaked her out. She probably just doesn't recognize me." At this point, I was very uncomfortable, and I kept checking my phone and texting my mom because she was over an hour late. Kind of got to a standstill in the conversation when he finished his food and we sat at the table quietly. He finished his food and I assumed he would go home, but instead he walked back over and sat down, even closer to me, and started asking extremely personal questions. He asked which school I went to, and I couldn't lie or make up an answer because the bag I carried my extra clothes in had my school's name and symbol on it. He then began to ask where I lived, what street, and which way it was, still acting like he had no idea where he was going. I told him I lived in the complete opposite direction I actually lived, and he seemed to believe it. He then began to ask what I was working for, and I said, "Oh, a new phone, new laptop, and a car." Then he said, "You're in luck. I have all of those things. Like I have a run-down but good car, new iPhone 6, and I have a few laptops you'd have to check out. And I'd be happy to sell you all these things with a good discount." I humored him and pretended I was interested. He started talking about where he lived and that he had 3 roommates that were bigger than he is, which was really off-putting, and they would like to meet me because of how sweet and interesting I was. Then he said, "You should come over. We have a nice hot tub and cool playroom, and you could tell your mom you were going to a stranger's house." He laughed like he just made a hilarious joke and said, "No, I'm kidding. Tell her you're going to a good friend's house." I nodded and he said, "I'll text you the address. I'll give you my number." Him obviously knowing I have a phone, I reluctantly got his number and texted him a simple, "Hey." Then he got excited and started talking about how great where he lives is and how cool his roommates are, and that I should bring over some guy friends and we could all have a lot of fun. As he said this, my mother showed up, and I left in a hurry saying bye and such. When he left, I looked in the mirror and he was staring at the lower part of the car. What I assumed he was looking at was the plate number, or maybe he was just trying to see me. A few days go by and I meet up with my good friend. We're going to call Sean. So Sean and I are talking and I tell him about Tim. And I tell him the story, and at the end, I mention him saying his name is Tim. Sean's face goes pale and he mutters, "Tim?" I said, "Yeah?" Then he starts kind of freaking out, and he describes Tim perfectly. And I didn't tell him what Tim looked like, and I asked how he knew him. The next day after Tim spoke to me, Sean met him. Sean was going on a date with his girlfriend at the park, and he told her to meet him there. and he'd be waiting. So Sean gets to the park about 10 minutes early, and this nice white van pulls up directly to his right. Sean pays no mind and looks down at his phone. A few seconds later, he sees movement from the van out of the corner of his eye. He sees a hefty, big guy trying to look in Sean's window. When Sean looked up, the guy looked straight down, pretending to be looking for something. Sean just brushes it off and gets out of the car and walks down to a bench. As he's walking, he hears a car door open, and he hears someone walking behind him. He just assumes it's someone at the park and sits down. When he turns around, it's the man from the van, walking toward him quickly. He sits down and starts asking very personal questions like where he works, where he lives, why he's there, and where he goes to school. Sean tells him he's meeting his girlfriend, and the guy starts asking the same questions about Sean's girlfriend. Sean, of course, lies about where his girlfriend is and what she does. Sooner or later, he introduces himself as Tim, and they talk about the housing situation and that he sells a lot of stuff and all that. They talk until Sean's girlfriend shows up, and Sean excuses himself. Tim sits there and says goodbye, gets in his van, and drives off. Sean and his girlfriend go on a date thinking nothing of this encounter, and when they leave, he exits the park's parking lot and sees the exact same van up the street just sitting there. Seeing this, he speeds off, calling his girlfriend to report what's happening. She says he's just sitting there not doing anything. So they both leave and calm down, and after a few days he thinks nothing of it. The next time I go back to work, my manager said there was a guy asking for me named Tim. I told him what Tim was doing, and if he comes in, tell him I'm not here. For the next 3 days, Tim comes into my store and Sean's looking for us. He texts me and him constantly and is very aggressive about it. Sean is forced to talk to him because the layout of his store, you can't see people till they're very close, and Sean did not have time to go to the back of the building. I was lucky, because I could see him pull up every day and I would go to the back and tell my manager, and they cover for me while I cleaned or fixed something. On the 3rd day I was caught off guard because it was night time, and he walked in while I was sweeping the floors. He walked in the door all the way in the back of the store and walked up to me and was excited to see me and said, "Hey, Chase. How have you been? Why, you haven't been at work and I've been wanting to see you. I came in at night because I knew you'd be working." At this point, I should tell you, Sean's dad was a police officer and we told him about Tim. But they couldn't do anything because he did not actually say anything or do anything incriminating. After that night, I told his father what he said, and his father said they could file a report now because that could be considered stalking since he knew my schedule. After he filed the report, we did not see or hear from Tim again. I don't know why he stopped, because he would not know we had reported him, unless he heard from someone else. The thing about the local license plate. I started driving, and I asked how long you had to be living here. The DMV said at least a month to get our local license plate. But he said he had only been here a few days. What creeps me out is that both Zaxby's and the park where Sean was is populated with kids from 5 to 16. and he obviously knew that because he approached us or waited for us. And I really hope he did not actually get anyone into that house, because I do not know what he wanted or what he would have done. So, creepy stalker man named Tim, let's not meet again. 21. I'm a female, and this happened when I was around 10 to 13 years old. I'm 22 now. I can't quite remember exactly how old I was when it happened because, you know how it is. Childhood memories start getting jumbled up regarding ages as you grow older. I do remember that it was summer because it was very hot, and it was a weekend since both of my parents were home during the day. A bit of an explanation about my old house and the neighborhood this incident took place in. The neighborhood was a pretty calm and peaceful one, middle class, and I can't recall any major crime ever happening. However, it was surrounded by major roads on all sides, and there was a highway that ran behind my house. Specifically, my house had my backyard, then a pond, and a small bit of forest, and then the highway beyond that. Because of this, there was a lot of traffic with random cars coming and going through the neighborhood. People basically used the neighborhood to cut through to other major streets. For this reason, my mom didn't let my sisters and I play outside further than riding our scooters up and down our street, which only consisted of around 7 houses. As for my house, my parents had renovated the garage a few years prior, so that there were large built-in pantry shelves with sliding doors on one side of the garage next to the minivan, where we kept a lot of extra food. And it was usually my job to retrieve things. On this specific day, my mom was cooking something and told me to find some food item from the pantry in the garage. I stepped out into the garage, and for some reason, the garage door was open. This was a little unusual, but I didn't think much of it. What I did notice more, however, was that a weird beaten-up van was parked directly across the street from my house. I'm a paranoid person, and I was paranoid even back then. So seeing what I've always privately dubbed as a kidnapper van, the kind that doesn't have windows in the back, made me pause and stare at it suspiciously for a moment. However, since there was nothing else to be suspicious about, I turned away from it and slid past the minivan, sliding over the pantry shelves on my left. This made me slightly uncomfortable because A, it meant my back was turned away from the van on the street, and B, it blocked me from the van's view because my own family's minivan was in the way, which was great for hiding, but bad in case someone was creeping up on me. Told you I was paranoid as a kid. So while I searched for the food item on the cluttered shelves, I tiptoed to the back of the minivan a few times to check on the van. One of these times I get a shock when I realized a dude had appeared, was leaning against the van, and was staring back at me. I uneasily hurried back to the pantry and began frantically searching for the food menu. You might be wondering why I didn't run inside right then if I felt uncomfortable. Well, I should have, and such is the stupidity of young kids. I naively thought that my mom would get mad at me if I came back inside without her food item, completely forgetting that if I told her a man was staring at me, she probably wouldn't have been mad at all. So I kept searching. I kept trying to tell myself I was being stupid. After all, the guy was just standing, not doing anything wrong. but I still felt uneasy. He had seen me. I finally found the food item, relieved, spun around, only to get the fright of my life. My heart nearly jumped out of my chest when I saw that the guy was standing right there in my garage. He came up so quickly and silently that I hadn't even noticed. Let me paint this scene. I'm standing on one side of my minivan, the garage pantry behind me. He's standing on the other side of the minivan. The door to the house is like 2 feet to his left. Me, him, and the door to the house makes a weird triangle. We're staring at each other over the hood of the minivan. I basically would have to get past him to get to the door, and he could grab me. I could also run in the other direction, out the garage, but I worried he'd catch me that way too. And then be that much closer to dragging me to his van. I was too shocked to speak, and I stared at him, frozen. He looked disheveled and scruffy. Not the kind of guy you'd want to be around. I think he was in his mid to late 20s. What he did next frightened me even more. He gave me a weird, creepy smile and asked, "Hey, little girl, are your parents home?" Bear in mind that my family had 3 cars at the time. My mom's car, my dad's car, and the minivan. One car was always on the driveway at any given time. Except one of the extra cars was gone for some reason. That wasn't terribly unusual. I had lots of relatives in the area, and everyone occasionally borrowed someone else's car if they needed it. But if someone had been watching the house, I don't know. It may have looked like my parents were gone. In retrospect, his question makes me snort a bit. It's just so cliché. Didn't he have anything less obviously creepy to start with? But as a kid, his question sent off major alarms in my head, and for some reason, it shot me into action. I suddenly blew past him like a rocket, so quickly that I think he was startled. I sprinted into my house so fast, I tripped on the carpet and skinned my knee badly. My mom, who was at the kitchen sink, looked over at me quizzically, and for some reason, I gave this weird, wheezy giggle. To this day, I have no idea why I laughed, and breathlessly said, "There's a man in our garage. He asked me if my parents were home." An expression of alarm crossed my mom's face, and she quickly called my dad. My dad ran out of the house to apprehend the guy and see what the hell his deal was. What kind of adult man walks into someone's garage and asks a young girl if her parents are home? By the time he got outside, the man and van were both gone. I was scared to go into the garage alone for some time after that. Thankfully, I never saw the guy again. If I recall properly, my parents still called the non-emergency police number and described the situation as best they could. So, a creepy guy who walks into people's garages and might potentially be a kidnapper. Let's not meet again. 22. I was 11 when this happened. Ariel, my older sister, was 14, and Belle, my younger sister, was 8. My dad was a freelance programmer when I was younger. He made great money on his jobs, but because he was so heavily in debt, 500,000 plus, and my mom was not the most gifted person on balancing a budget, we never had much free money available. This meant that we went on a vacation once every few years, and usually that was to a relative's house. My dad had just finished a long project for a big client, and we were celebrating the occasion with a new movie, Final Destination, because my dad loved watching scary stuff and scaring the daylights out of my sisters and me. We were in the middle of the movie when the phone rang. He went to get it, and came back to grab Mom while we kept watching the movie. Belle took the opportunity to pause the film to take Duchess, our dog, captive because she was scared. They came back about 10 minutes later and announced that we were going to be spending the weekend in a cabin. We didn't know what to make of that, but apparently the client he'd been helping owned a nice cabin by a lake in the mountains, and offered to let us lodge there this weekend for a considerably reduced price. It was Thursday, so Mom went into a panicked frenzy of packing, so we didn't see the rest of the movie that night. After school the next day, we packed up the family van and headed to the mountains. It was a 2.5-hour drive, so it was late by the time we got there. We unloaded the van and went exploring the cabin. It was a ranch-style cabin with a little nook thing you could climb up that was about head height. It was about 3 feet tall and probably meant for storage, but it was an excellent place for the three of us to hang in and play games. There were a few dozen board games up there, so we started playing once we decided on the rooms. Mom and Dad got the largest one. Ariel claimed the smaller one with a twin bed, so Belle and I got the last room, which had a queen-sized bed we could share. We had a window on the right side of the bed without a curtain, and a lamp on the left side of the bed. It was the only light source in the room, and there was a closet opposite the bed. It was locked, and we couldn't get in. I never did figure out what was inside there. We went to bed at around 11. Belle is a kicker, so I slept by the lamp in case she ended up knocking it over. I remember lying down, and I must have instantly fallen asleep because the next thing I know, Belle was gripping my arm and trying to burrow under me. She was squeaking something in fright, and I couldn't understand what was happening. I sat up, looked towards her, and saw something pale and human-shaped moving away from the window. My sleepy brain took several moments to process that, and then I was shooting out of bed and dragging Belle with me. We rushed to our parents, who told us we were imagining things. Mom told us to go back to bed, and if we saw anything else to let them know. I, much to my current annoyance, agreed with them and went back into the room with Belle. We switched positions because she refused to go back to bed by the window. I got her a story to get her asleep, and promptly conked out after her. I didn't wake up until the morning. The next day we went exploring around the lake for about an hour before Dad decided we'd spend the day in the town. They had a lot of small shops, and my parents went into every one of them. We ate lunch and dinner in the town and finally went back to the cabin. Ariel made a joke about something as we neared the cabin, and I remember everybody laughing before my dad suddenly held up his hand to make everyone stop. He took another step towards the cabin and pushed the door open with a single finger. I thought it was strange that the door wasn't latched, but didn't put the obvious together right away. Dad? Ariel shuffled near to Belle and me, but Dad gave his head a shake to let her know she needed to be quiet. He went into the cabin and disappeared inside for a minute or two while we stood on the porch. Mom called out his name, and he called back that we could come inside. We did, and found him standing in the middle of the living room, dining room, with a frown. He locked the door once we were inside and took Mom to the bedroom for a quick chat. Ariel, having caught on to what was happening, opted to distract Belle and me by suggesting another round of the board game we'd been playing the night before. We hadn't been playing for more than 5 minutes when Mom and Dad came back. Mom went about cleaning the dishes from breakfast, while Dad joined our game. We played for a few hours before Dad told us we needed to go to bed. It was only 9 at that point, which made Ariel mad. She was allowed to stay up until 10:30 on school nights, and later on weekends. Belle and I went on to bed while they argued. We climbed back into the same spots we slept in, Belle by the window and me by the lamp. I read to Belle for a bit before we drifted off. I woke to Dad rushing into my room. He scooped Belle out of bed and grabbed my hand. He dragged me out of the room and into the hall, where I saw Ariel getting similar treatment by Mom. I became aware of a high-pitched whine in the living room and saw her dog sitting at attention by the back door. She was bristled and seemed anxious. Dad didn't put Belle down and didn't let go of my hand. They rushed out of the house and into the van. Dad went back to get our dog, and then he burned rubber getting out of the cabin. He drove all the way back home without talking once. It took a half hour for Duchess to calm down. He told Ariel what happened the next day, but Belle and I didn't find out until years later. He'd woken up that night to what sounded like moaning outside the window in his room. He jumped up and looked to see what was going on, and he found the front door unlocked. Stuff in the kitchen had been moved, and Duchess started to growl at the back door, which was ajar. He locked it and got us out of the house. He went back the next day to get our luggage and found several pairs of footprints outside Belle's and my window. 23. So me and my friend were relocated with work for 6 months. We found a flat and off we went. Everyone that lived in the flats was really friendly, and everyone said hello to each other, etc. Lovely people. There was one guy who liked to travel. He told us he was off to Thailand. On his return, he had brought with him a guy that he met over there, who was looking to rent a room somewhere. He was polite also, saying hello, would wave from his window. We stopped seeing the owner so much, and I know everyone else started asking the tenant if the owner was okay as well. He used to play his TV really loudly, and no one had heard it for a while. The guy was charming and, oh no, we did this last night, we had dinner, etc. After a couple of days, we didn't see him either. Fast forward a couple of weeks, I get home. Police everywhere. I had to sign into my building with the police. As I walked up the stairs, a smell hit the back of my throat, and I couldn't hold back the vomit. The tenant had used the owner's phone to text the owner's family, saying he was fine, and not to contact him, as he was going away again for a week or so. In reality, the tenant had killed the guy by hitting him round the head at least 12 times with either a hammer or a bat, and then left him there. To make it worse, his pregnant daughter found him. There would have been a lapse, so all the time that he was saying hello to us and the other neighbors and telling us that everything was fine, he was in fact living with a dead body wrapped up in a rug in the flat. We later found out he had murdered him and transferred a measly £7,000 from his account to his own, and then run away to Thailand. The scariest thing about this man was now knowing that he had murdered someone and had remained so calm, planning his getaway while staying in the flat with his victim, and still being cheery with the neighbors. And I know now that the day he stood at his window waving at me and smiling, he was in the same room as the body was found, which makes me feel really sick, knowing that poor guy was with them and I just stood waving. I hope we never meet again. 24. This happened to me 20 years ago, 1996, in Orlando, Florida. I was 15 years old at the time and was quite fond of riding my BMX bike, as were the two friends I was with, Jake and Ryan, who were brothers. Jake was my age, and Ryan was a couple years younger. I was in 10th grade and had a class with Jake, where we met because one of us saw the other reading a BMX Plus magazine. We spoke of where we would ride and realized we lived within a short bike ride of each other. We would soon ride around together fairly often. One day he spoke of some dirt jumps in the woods fairly close to our neighborhood. I had never went, but had heard of them through other kids at school. We decided that the next day we would go over after school. If you're from Orlando and lived near South Cimarron Boulevard, Catlin, in the mid-90s you may have even went there to do the jumps. We left our neighborhood and rode over to the spot. It was all woods, but whoever built the jumps had cleared a small trail from the road, which we found quickly. We rode down the trail and after a fairly short ride discovered a few pretty cool jumps. No one else was there, thankfully, so we had the place to ourselves. Eventually we decided to call it a day, but us being young teenagers wanted to explore the woods before leaving. Bad idea. So we ride deeper into the woods, down some trails that others had created, so we felt fairly safe knowing people had been there before. Eventually the woods stop, and we reach a drainage ditch. We ride down a ways and come to a drain pipe that was covered in dirt to create a bridge over the ditch. We were pretty tired, plus I like peering into these Florida ditches because you can often see wildlife of various sorts. So we drop our bikes in the grass and start walking over this bridge thing to have a closer look in the water. This is when I got that odd feeling that we were being watched. This is when I noticed a tall, dirty man had emerged from the woods just ahead of us, wearing a long, dark trench coat. It was later afternoon and very hot, so this was not normal at all. Holding what I believe was a shotgun or rifle, but it could have been a long pipe as well. He had it sort of to his side, so his leg partially blocked my view. He was standing perfectly still, just staring at the three of us. I just stared back in complete shock. What was he doing? What did he want? Where did he come from? The two of them were still unaware of this man until I muttered, guys?" with obvious fear in my voice. They both instantly turned and not a word was said. Not from us and not from the man. We all stood there staring at him and him at us. Or through us, as it felt. He never moved. Shit, I don't think he even blinked. He just stood there with the most menacing look, never saying a word. I don't know how long we stood there motionless, but it felt like eternity. I don't remember who said it, but eventually the silence was broken by one of us. "Let's fucking go." And with that, we all sprinted towards our bikes and pedaled back towards the trail faster than I am sure we ever had or will again. I don't know if they looked back, but I sure as hell didn't. We tore through the trails, past the jumps, and back to the road in a heartbeat. I don't think any one of us had ever been so scared. I never went back to those jumps again. So, trenchcoat man by the ditch, let's never meet again. 25. I was on a school trip. It was senior year and our high school has a senior trip every year. Other schools have these trips too, I'm sure. My whole class, a whopping 23 students, started fundraising at the start of 8th grade year. Living in a remote town in Northern California, we decided as a class to go down to LA for a week. We decided we'd go see Venice Beach, Universal Studios, and other such LA attractions. We stayed in a hostel right on Venice Beach. We got 2 rooms to ourselves, a boys' room and a girls' room. I got to stay in the girls' room, woo, because all the beds were taken in the boys' room. Me, being the 275-pound, 6 feet tall motherfucker I am, whenever anyone wanted to go out to walk around, I would walk with them, because I am polite. This is where things take a bad turn. One of the girls wanted to go out, so she asked me to come along. I agreed and went with her. Walking down the sidewalk next to the beach, her phone rang. It was her other friend wanting to chat, so she went to go talk to her. I sat down on a bench while she talked. I could see her, of course, but she was far enough to be out of earshot. There were a few people around because it's LA and there's always people around. There was a man stumbling about, tattoos out the ass. Probably. I have nothing against tattoos, trust me, I'm just describing him. He was scrawny and tall. He started yelling about how just because someone is in a club, that doesn't mean someone has a bigger dick. I was very confused, and sure I was missing most of the story. He walked towards a couple that were at a table, and they said something, and he walked away from them towards me. I instantly tensed up because I had almost zero fighting experience, and was not ready to deal with a, then thought, drunk guy. He locked eyes with me, walked up to me, turned so that he was perpendicular to the way I was facing, and pulled out a knife. I froze. It wasn't really a knife, it was one of those X-Acto knives used in art and shit. I don't know what they're used for. I did not care about the type of blade, just very aware that it would hurt if jammed into my neck. The girl was walking back by this time and saw him pull the knife. I looked at her, and she started to walk towards the hostel, which was no more than 2 minutes away. He then proceeds to hold out his arm. This is when I noticed the track marks on his arm. He was a junkie. I instantly started thinking about what my final words should be. But instead of saying anything to me, he looks down at his hand. He starts mumbling about something. I was too freaked out to worry about the semantics of a heroin ramble. He takes a knife and starts cutting the top of his hand. I can see the blood pour out of the first slice. My heart is no longer felt anywhere in my person. I stop breathing. My brain remembers that I do in fact have working legs. I get up and walk away toward the hostel. I get to the front door and there's the girl on her way down with the chaperones. They stop me and ask if I'm okay. I tell them what happened and that I wasn't hurt and everything is okay. I go up to the boys' room to hang out and I recount the story. They're all stoned and talking about getting a pizza. I figure pizza sounds good, so I order a pizza. The pizza was in fact good. 26. This is a story from when I was 16 years old. I was a sophomore in high school and I had recently thrown my rebellious stage into full throttle, trying every drug available to me. The one drug I've never tried is meth, but as life would ironically have it, I started dating this meth addict named Richard. This story isn't so much about him as it is about his dealer, TJ. My boyfriend was a tiny, short guy who, fortunately, never laid a hand on me. His dealer, on the other hand, was a massive guy. He stood 6'3". He must have weighed 300 pounds. He had a machete he kept in his boot at all times, and I once saw him knock a guy out for simply glancing at his house. He is a schizophrenic meth addict and dealer. He also lived directly across the street from me. About 6 months into my relationship with Richard, I ended it and told my parents everything. They were concerned, of course, but I was still in a lot of trouble. A few weeks after we'd broken up, I get a Skype video request call from him. I stupidly accepted it and he cut right to the chase, telling me that TJ's cousin had recently been arrested and somehow their meth-addled brains believed I was the cause of this despite never having met his cousin. I told Richard to try and talk some sense into TJ, but all Richard said was, "I'm just trying to warn you. He's coming," and ended the Skype call. Because I was a stupid teenager, I didn't report this to the police and didn't tell my parents until much later in life. I think my reasoning at the time was that I was using a lot of drugs myself, and I was afraid that I would get in trouble as well. After the night of the Skype call, I saw TJ everywhere. He was watching my house. He would show up at the park near my school where I'd smoke, and I'd see him standing across the street from my bus stop. He never said anything or made any moves. He just stared at me. This continued on for a few months, ramping up my anxiety and making it impossible for me to sleep. I started falling asleep in class and finding riskier places to smoke near campus to stay away from him. It was total agony, knowing that someone horrible was coming, but I was still too dumb to do anything about it. Luckily, TJ got busted after 3 months of watching me, because some lady suspected he was making meth in his house. He's still in jail, from what I know, and I never saw Richard again after that Skype call. I hope I never have to see him again, and I would be smart enough now to contact the police if I do. 27. I was 18 or 19, young and dumb, on our way to party. "Hey," we hear from behind us, "you guys going to the party?" "Well, yes, as a matter of fact, we are." "Okay, I'll walk with you." "Great. Name's Don." We introduce ourselves, get to the house party, and find a spot to sit, talking with some friends that I haven't seen in a while, and our new friend, Don. The night is going smoothly, with some strange tales of being an RCMP officer. Don is a young guy, regaling us with the time he was called to roll over on the highway, only to find it was his fiancée. He had to leave his job as he just couldn't take it anymore. He also talked of a time he showed up to an accident of a biker, dead on scene, and the girlfriend who was brain dead after the accident. I knew this man. Don even remembered the bike, make, model, and year. So sad. I remembered the story and the man very well. He was a dear friend of mine. It was only a couple years ago. Party's over. Don doesn't want the night to end and offers to continue the party at his place. Okay. He says he will pay for the cab and beers. Sure enough, we get a cab, go to a beer store and load up, back to his place. He starts showing us his police RCMP memorabilia, handcuffs, badges, etc. Thought this was strange, as earlier he said he left that job. He disappears for a while, 15 minutes, 30 minutes. BF and I just keep looking at each other. We feel more and more uncomfortable. Okay, something's up. Time to leave, and leave we did, in a hurry. Fast forward a month or so. Friend who had the party calls me and asks about my friend Don. I don't have a friend, Don. Yes, the guy you brought to my party. I said no. He was your friend. We just met him outside your house. Nope, no one here has ever seen or heard of him. My friend tells me that half of their friends were missing their wallets at night, and all their money was gone. Some of the stolen wallets were found hidden inside the toilet tank, but all the money gone. I felt awful. I unintentionally brought a thief into their home. More time goes by, maybe a few months. I get a phone call at work from Don. He somehow found out where I work, and he's actually asking for bail money. He was arrested for impersonating an RCMP officer. He took whatever little bits of information we gave him and made it sound like he came up with the details. He was a master manipulator. He didn't show up to a rollover where his fiancée died. He did not show up to the scene of an accident that involved my friend. He had stolen the police RCMP gear and robbed my friends blind. He paid for the cab and beers that night with their money. I don't know what ever came of him, as I threatened to also have him charged with stalking if he ever called me again. So I never heard from him again, thankfully. I should mention this was 30 years ago, so no social media, and no idea how he found out where I worked. 28. When my son was a baby, my mother-in-law would watch him for us while we worked. Because my shift started at 6 a.m., I would pack the baby up early to drive him to mother-in-law's house, and turn around and go right to work. It was about 1.5 miles from mother-in-law's house, and I would travel the main road. One particular morning I drove, traveling south, approximately 5:15 a.m. to drop the baby off to my mother-in-law. It was mid-October and the sun wasn't quite up yet. Near the side of the road on the opposite side, I noticed an older model black vehicle sitting with no driver, passenger. In retrospect, it stuck out because it wasn't quite parked at the side of the road. But it wasn't sticking out to block traffic either. It legit looked stranded. I dropped the baby off with mother-in-law and left to go to work. Using the same main road, passing the same area, seeing the same car. But now it's on my side of the road because I'm traveling north. I slowed down because I suddenly noticed a man standing near the front bumper of the car. He was wearing a white button-down shirt, black pants, and was holding his hands up over his head. In one hand he was jingling a key ring with keys on it. In the other hand it looked to be a wallet. Being very young and altruistic, I instantly felt bad for this man because clearly he had broken down at the side of the road with no help. To put this in perspective, back then, not everyone had cell phones, and yes, I'm old now. Altruistic me slows down as I got closer, and the man's face brightened up, making me feel even better for thinking about being a good person for helping him. Again, clearly, he was a businessman who had broken down on the side of the road, likely late for work, and there I am to help, right? He approaches my car and says to me, "You answered my prayers. Could you just take me about 1 mile up the road?" I said, "Sure, of course. Did your car break down?" He replied with, "Good thing it's not my car." Stupid me then quickly reasoned that it must be his wife's car, and he was just keeping his good humor with such a horrible morning. I motioned for him to get into my car and I told him to put his seatbelt on. I was used to buckling the baby into his car seat and always made sure passengers buckled also. Although back then there wasn't a law for seatbelt use. The things I remember about this incident are so weird, sorry. He buckles his seatbelt and I proceed to put the car in drive and ask him if I'm dropping him off at work or where he was going because I wanted to make small talk with my passenger. Within a moment of pulling away from his car, not his car, he leans towards me and says, "So, do you want to know how many felonies I have?" My heart sunk for a quick second and I laughed, hoping he would be laughing with me. Silence. So I glanced over at him while still trying to drive and keep my composure. And he's staring at me with the deadpan stare and a smirk on his face. I instantly became panicked and angry, remembering all the useless self-defense tips I'd learned, realizing that at this point in time, they would do me no good. I was in a vehicle with a stranger that I had willingly let into my car. My hands got tight on the steering wheel, and before I could get another thought through my head, he said to me, "Why did you think that was my car on the side of the road? I'm not allowed to have a license, let alone a car. You dizzy little girl." And he was laughing the most horrid laugh I'd ever heard. To this day, I'll never forget it. I slammed the brakes on as soon as he called me dizzy little girl. There was barely any traffic, although I was hoping a car would have rear-ended me to signal police help. Anything. From the pit of my soul, I screamed, "Get the fuck out of my car, you motherfucker, or I'll stab you." I didn't have a knife, and I don't know why I said what I said, but he unbuckled his seatbelt and dashed out of my car. I was so shaken and peeled off as fast as I could. I went straight to work and shared the morning's events with my co-workers. I'm shaking right now, typing this out. I could imagine the mess I was in by the time I got to work. I was crying a lot. It was so horrific. After my shift, I went back the same road so I could pick the baby up from mother-in-law's house, and that car was still there in the same spot. I pulled into the gas station. I hadn't seen it that morning because I hadn't been paying attention and it was still darkish outside that morning, and asked the cashier if she knew who that black car belonged to, and she said she had no clue. It had been there the day before, but someone must have taken the white rag off of it, or it blew away, because it was gone now. A white rag tied to a side view mirror or car door handle means there was a mechanical issue, and please don't give me a ticket signal. I don't know if this was a national trick for motorists, but that's what people do where I'm from. I couldn't tell the cashier what happened that morning due to pure embarrassment. So I went to pick my baby up from my mother-in-law's house and went home. I didn't take that main road again for a very long time, because business casual hitchhiker. Let's not meet. 29. I was working at a small college on the East Coast in the physical education department. I taught classes, worked as a strength and conditioning coach for their athletic teams, and had a separate contract with the school so I could use their facilities for personal training. It was a very active campus. There are many trails around and through the campus for joggers and cyclists. The only time of the year that there weren't a lot of people on campus were the first 2 weeks of August. During that time, the place was a ghost town. All buildings on campus had their power cut, so the school could save money. The only buildings that still had power were the administration and physical education buildings. In order to understand what happened, I have to explain the setup of the building as it can be somewhat confusing. It is built into the side of a hill and has 4 floors. There are 3 entrances. The first floor entrance, which would be considered the back of the building, faces west. The main entrance, which is on the 3rd floor, faces east. And a side entrance, also on the 3rd floor, faces south. Confused? That's alright. It's going to get stranger in a minute. The 3rd floor south entrance leads to a small parking lot on the side of the hill. That is the faculty and staff parking lot. That's where I go in. I walk in that door, which leads to a basketball court and 2 flights of stairs to the 2nd floor. Going down these 2 flights of stairs leads you to my office and a small gym area I use to train athletes and clients. On a Saturday in early August, I had finished with my last client of the day. I decided to stay a little late to get a workout in. Since I didn't want anybody walking in the building while I was wearing headphones, and the only person authorized to be there, I locked the south door and set the security system. When I was finished working out, I went into my office to finish some work and get things ready for that Monday. The blaring of the alarm system got my attention, and I walked to the nearest keypad, which was down the hall. The display showed that the alarm on the 1st floor entrance had been tripped. I turned off the alarm and headed downstairs. It wasn't the first time this had happened, and I thought it could have been a jogger or a cyclist who needed a drink, or to use the bathroom or was hurt in some way. When I got to the 1st floor entrance, there was no one in sight. I opened the door, looked around, still didn't see anyone. Figuring they had already left, I pulled the door shut, made sure it was locked, and turned back to the stairs. That's when I heard it. On the stairs above me there was a stomp, stomp. "Hello?" I said. Stomp, stomp. "Hello?" I yelled again in a louder and deeper voice to let whoever was there know that I wasn't messing around. Stomp, stomp. God damn it. I muttered as I began climbing the stairs, listening to the stomping echo my own footsteps. I reached the 2nd floor and still heard the stomping above me. "Hello?" I yelled again. I reached the 3rd floor and still heard the stomps. There is nothing on the 4th floor except the main office. I tried to rationalize what I was hearing. Maybe it was an employee who forgot something in the office. Maybe they were wearing headphones and couldn't hear me, or somehow the alarm they set off. I rounded the corner in the hallway and walked to the office door. The lights in the office are automatic. If anyone had walked in, they would be on. They were off. I tried the door anyway and found that it was locked as it should be. What the hell is happening? I thought. I began moving back to the stairs when the alarm sounded again. I ran to the elevator and checked the display, which showed that the alarm was from the 3rd floor east entrance. I bounded down the stairs and sprinted across the main lobby of the building. I crashed through the door and looked around, hoping to see who was messing with me. Nothing. I pulled the door shut, made sure it was locked, and made my way to the stairs. I almost jumped out of my skin when the alarm rang again. I ran back to the elevator and checked the display. It was the 3rd floor south entrance. My entrance. The fastest way to get there was to cut across the basketball court. However, the door was locked since the school would use the 2 weeks when there was no one around to redo the court every year. Like most gym doors, if you pull hard enough it opens, so I ripped the door open and, as fast and lightly as I could, ran across the court towards my entrance. I rushed through the door and was standing in the faculty parking lot. There was nothing there except my car. By now I was freaked out, and more than a little pissed off. I decided to head back to my office, call campus security, and tell them someone was in the building setting off alarms and giving me the runaround. I stomped down the first flight of stairs, muttering curse words to myself. I hit the landing, turned a corner, and a man who, at that moment, seemed to be 8 feet tall, ducked down, got right in my face, and said, "Hello." He then walked past me, up the stairs, and out the door. If he had turned around and looked back before pushing the door open, he would have seen me leaning against a brick wall, arms spread to my side, gripping the wall for support, with what I can only imagine would have been a terrified look on my face. After what seemed like an hour, but was most likely only seconds, I peeled myself off the wall and went to my office. I locked the door behind me, sat in my chair, and tried to figure out what the hell just happened. I don't really know how long I sat there, but it was long enough that my wife sent me a text asking why I wasn't home yet. I gathered my things and went to the stairs. I stopped at the door. A vision flashed before me of the large man I had seen leaning against my car, waiting for me. The relief I felt when I opened the door and found an empty parking lot was one of the most amazing feelings I've ever had. As I drove away, I looked for the man everywhere, but I couldn't find him. To this day, I have 1,000 questions about that day. How he got in, how he went from the 4th floor to the 3rd floor without me seeing him, etc. But I don't think I will ever figure out. 30. My grandparents started making me go to church after I moved in with them, and they introduced me to a guy who they thought could need some more friends. John was 18, but my grandparents didn't know that. They didn't know anything about him or his family. The only thing that they knew was that they were Christian and that they were new to our small town. The day they introduced us was the day the church had a big potluck down in the basement, and they invited John and his parents to sit with us for the meal. Now, I have not been a very social person, and it was hard for me to make friends. I had a very small group of friends from school that I stuck with, and that was it. I didn't want to be rude, and I didn't want to hurt this guy's feelings, so I tried my best to befriend him, and I actually thought he was cool at first. He wasn't like the normal people you would meet at churches. He was into some of the same bands as me, and his parents made him go to church, even though he didn't believe just like me. Since I was young and naive, I quickly developed a crush on John. A couple weeks after the potluck, he called my grandparents and asked if he could take me to the skating rink with a couple of friends. My grandparents didn't think anything of it and said that it was fine as long as I was home at 11:30. Him and his friends picked me up, and we made our way to the ice skating rink. It took about an hour to get there, and nobody talked the whole way there. It was really uncomfortable, and John just stared out of the window with a pained look on his face. It gave me a weird and unsafe feeling, but I didn't want to be uncool and ask to be taken home. When we got there, they dropped John and us off at the doors and took off. I asked him if they would be hanging out with us at the rink, and he just said in the same face he had back in the van, "They're busy." It sounded like there was no emotion in his voice. But I thought that he was cute, so I didn't pay attention. Everything about him changed once we got into the freezing building. He started smiling and put his arm around me while we waited in line. I tried acting cool and like I didn't even care that his arm was around me, but I was internally screaming with excitement. And I think he could tell when he looked at me. When we got up to the front desk, he paid for us and got the skates. Now, I had never gone ice skating before in my life, and I had no idea how to put these devil knife shoes on. We sat down at the bench near the ice and a snack bar, and he put his skates on like a pro. I sat there trying to figure out what lace goes where and how tight I should have it. He laughed, got down in front of me and tied them up for me, glancing at me every couple seconds and smiling. This made me feel like blushing. No one could ever make me blush. I didn't care for dating. I didn't care for boys all that much really either. Finally, he finished with my skates, taking more time on them than he did with his own. He took me by the hand and led me to the ice. Now, this wasn't a graceful couple of steps to the ice most people imagine with a date like this. He took my hand and helped me up. Once I stood up, my ankles decided to nope the fuck out, and I fell flat on my face. He started laughing at me, which made my heart sink a little before helping me up to my devil knife feet. "Don't worry, love. I actually broke my leg the first time I went ice skating," he said, holding back the laughter. What he said didn't really make me feel any better since I hadn't even stepped foot on the ice yet. He helped me walk over to the ice while my legs were wobbling worse than newborn baby deer legs. I wished so hard that I wouldn't end up breaking my leg. I ended up doing really well after smashing my face against the ice a couple times. John either held my hand the whole time or had his arm around my waist the whole time to help me from not hugging the ice with my face. He was sweet. We shared memories and we shared dreams we had about the future. We were both cold and hungry, so we decided to call our ride and head to Miners. His friends stayed with us this time, and they never really talked. They just sat there and ate their food while John and I laughed and joked. We talked the night away, and we really did have fun. That's why to this day it's still hard to believe what happened in the months to come. They drove us home, and I was 20 minutes early, which my grandparents were really happy about. I went to bed, and that was that. Nothing until Sunday. He sat next to me at church, and we talked about our love for Marilyn Manson. His father didn't seem to like me very much, but his mother seemed to adore me. She always wanted to take me with her somewhere, and she would buy me cool stuff. She didn't mind my style, and one day bought me a pair of earrings that was a guitar and a guitar pick. I loved them, and I wore them all the time. I even wore them to church when my grandparents didn't make me put my hair up. Sometimes, John and I would talk about sensitive subjects, things that had happened to me in my younger years that I really didn't want to talk about. But he would pry until I gave up and told him. After I told him about an event that happened to me when I was 11, he didn't act the same way around me anymore. He would act like he pitied me and was hurt for me. I didn't really like that kind of attention, so after a while, I stopped wanting to talk to him and hang out with him. Eventually we started talking and he apologized for making me uncomfortable and asked me if I wanted to come over to his house and go swimming. His apartment complex had an indoor swimming pool. It had been hot for the early summer, and I wouldn't ever pass up a chance to go swimming. His mom came and picked me up and, like always, was super talkative. Eventually, I learned how to tune out a lot of things she said. Sometimes she talked about things that really didn't hold my interest. We got to their house, and he ran up and hugged me tightly like he hadn't seen me in years. After the hug that was a little too long, he took me by the hand and ran me down the hall to his room. His walls were full of Marilyn Manson posters and odd tapestries. His room was small and had a little too much in it. I was jealous though. He had a queen-size bed. I only had a single. I sat down next to him and he asked me if I wanted him to be my boyfriend. My heart started beating fast, and the crush I had on him quickly returned. Like I said, I was naive. I said yes, and he smiled and kissed me. It wasn't my first kiss, but it was my first kiss like that. It was messy and uncomfortable. We walked down the halls of the building while holding hands. I felt special. I had never really been in a relationship at that time, and I didn't think anyone could actually be attracted to me. I had very bad self-esteem issues when I was younger. We finally got down to the pool and he pushed me in, with him jumping in right after I hit the water. We swam around for a while and splashed out you know, the cheesy stuff. We raced around the pool for a while, and I told him that he may have been better at ice skating, but I was better than him at swimming. His face turned sour and angry. He swam to the side of the pool that had the ladder, and got out and walked into the hot tub, and just stared at me. I swam by myself for a little while before I got out, and saw the creepy smile that John had on his face while he was looking at me. Where I moved, his eyes moved with me. His eyes looked glazed over, like it wasn't even him staring at me, like someone else took over and this someone else didn't have good intentions. I walked back to the bathroom, and of course I ended up slipping on the floor in the bathroom because I was still dripping wet. I lay down on the floor of the bathroom, holding my shoulder and trying not to say all the colorful words from normal day-to-day rainbow vocabulary. After the pain died down a little, I walked out of the bathroom, and guess who was legit right at the door? Creepy John with that stupid smile still plastered on his face. I think I want to go home, I sputtered out, still holding my shoulder. When I said that, his face changed into sadness, and the smile slowly disappeared. "Why do you want to go home?" he said with no emotion in his voice. I fell in the bathroom and I hurt myself. He looked at my shoulder and then leaned in and kissed it. "There, all better," he said with a real smile. The glazed look left his eyes and his emotion was back. He asked me if I wanted to sit in the hot tub with him, and I told him that it might help my arm, so why not? He sat in first, and then pulled me into his lap. The only thing I could think of at this point was that there was something wrong with John, and I didn't think I wanted to really be around him anymore. His father came home and offered to drive me home. I jumped at the chance, got ready. John gave me a kiss and I left. I didn't tell my grandparents about anything that happened. I was uncomfortable talking about it, and I felt like I could just deal with it myself. It was a terrible idea. and I wish I would have told someone. The night I went home, I didn't feel safe in my own room. I felt like someone was watching me. The blinds to the window in my room were white and see-through. If someone wanted to, they could see me through my window at any time they wanted to. Even when I went to sleep because I slept with my TV on. I've always had a fear of the dark, and this only made it worse. My grandparents went to sleep around 11 that night, and my grandfather had to get up around 8 to go to work. My grandmother wouldn't stay up without him because she had a fear of the dark as well, as all the lights shut off in the house and there was nothing but darkness other than my room. I hated that house when it was dark. It just never seemed like a normal darkness in the house. Since the house was so old you could hear anyone walking through the house. The floors were so old and creaky. Every night the floors would creak and groan. But you could tell the difference between the old house settling and someone sneaking through it in the dark. At least, I thought I could. I was laying down in my bed, watching some horror movie, slowly drifting to sleep, when I heard the floor creaking far away. It was coming from the kitchen area. In the house, we had 3 doors for some reason. There was the front door that led to the living room. When you walked through the front door and turned down the hall to the left, my grandparents' room, the empty guest room, the bathroom, and right across the hall from that bathroom was my room. Now in the kitchen was the sliding glass doors. My grandmother always pulled the curtains over, and then there was the back door that was right across my grandfather's bathroom and the laundry room. Sometimes my grandmother forgot to lock the back door. I jolted into alertness and listened to the sound of the floor. There were a couple creaks, and then there was nothing. I thought that it was just the floor because it stopped, and I tried going to sleep. My heart was pounding out of my chest, but I just tried to ignore it. Eventually, I ended up falling asleep again. Around 4 in the morning, I was awoken by some weird noise. It sounded like someone or something was chewing. It sounded like it was coming from right outside my bedroom door. Fear didn't creep through my body. It flooded through me so fast, I just about pissed myself. The sound of chewing and labored breathing continued for a couple minutes. I convinced myself that I had locked my door to my room, and that it was my Elvis chewing on something he got out of the garbage. Elvis was my dog. I laid in my bed and listened to the noise for a couple minutes until I heard a creak and the sound of something liquid hitting hardwood floor. My heart stopped, and I realized that the floor outside my room was carpeted. But the floor in my room was hardwood floor. The way my room was laid out was weird. I had a small hallway when entering into my room. The hallway was a couple feet long, and I couldn't see my door when laying in my bed. I was shaking so hard and I could feel tears from fear streaming down my face. The chewing sound continued until my phone vibrated. Then I heard someone get up fast and run through the house. The back door slammed, and then the fucker ran around the house to my bedroom window and slammed a bloody handprint against my window. It wasn't just his hand that was on my window. It was his whole lower arm, and I saw what he had been chewing. This crazy fucker chewed into his wrist and ate himself. I heard my grandfather getting up and running to my room. I couldn't look away from the window, then I noticed something. He had the same bracelet on the same arm that John did. My grandfather ran into my room and slipped in John's blood, hitting the floor with a loud thud and a sticky squelching sound. When he fell, the arm disappeared off the window and disappeared into the darkness, leaving a very bloody print on my window. My grandmother ran over screaming bloody murder and dialed the cops. I was still laying down in my bed when I passed out. The next day, I woke up in a hospital room bed with a cop sitting in the room with me. When he noticed I was awake, he called the nurse in to check in on me. She was all done and gave me the okay. The cop walked over to me and grabbed my hand gently and asked me if there was any way I saw the person who did this or knew who it was. I told him who it was and how I knew it was him and gave him the address. He called someone and gave them the information. He walked back over to me and told me that he wasn't going anywhere and that I was safe now. I didn't feel safe though. I never will. We went to the address and everything was cleaned out. There was nothing left of them to show they'd ever even been living there. To this day, they haven't caught John, and I moved far, far away. So John, let's not meet again.